G'day mates, it's Busta here. And before the video begins, I would like to give Surfshark a big shout out for sponsoring this video. So, Surfshark is a modern VPN designed with the user in mind. Their utilities are powered by robust security mechanisms but designed to be simple and intuitive to use. You can enjoy all the freedoms of an open internet safely and anonymously with Surfshark. As you guys are probably all aware of too, internet security and freedom is a hot topic these days. And in my opinion, both are incredibly important, especially for any of you guys in Europe who have Article 13 taking effect soon. I recently signed up to Surfshark for internet security myself, and I really appreciated just how easy it was to set up. I also love the fact that with Surfshark running, I can surf the web with no ads, trackers, malware, and no phishing attempts. You can also connect an unlimited amount of devices, which was great for my own house, where I swear I have like 200 separate devices at least, and there's also a 30-day money-back guarantee. Also, for a limited time, you can get 83% off of a 2-year plan and an additional month for free. All you have to do is go to surfshark.deals/bbuster. And this special offer makes your subscription just $1.91 per month, so you can browse securely on all of your devices. That's surfshark.deals/bbuster for 83% off of a 2-year plan and an additional month for free. I'll leave a link in the description as well for you guys so you can check it out. I do hope you guys take up Surfshark on their generous offer, and without further ado, let's begin. So, I've been hearing some weird stories from my daughter lately that have been reminding me of an experience that I had when I was younger, and I wanted to get your guys' take on it. A bit of backstory first, though. So, in 1994, when I was 11, I had an encounter with something that I can only describe as a shadow person. At the time, I had no idea what it was, a ghost, an alien. I had no clue. It started one April night when I was asleep, dreaming, and in my dream I was sitting on a wall looking over the PE field of my school when a kid that bullied me in real life came up to me, punched me in the chest, knocking me off the wall. I felt the pull, physical force of the blow, and it woke me up. I woke up screaming at him, my chest hurting from the punch. My physical body had been hit, and I had the wind just knocked out of me. When I woke up, I bolted upright to my sitting position, clutching my chest, trying to breathe. And as soon as I looked up across the room, I saw this thing. It looked like a shadowy kind of hooded monk, I suppose. Where its face should have been was just a darker shade of black. It seemed to be folding something in its hands over and over again. I say folding, but it was like he was manipulating a liquid cloth. The fabric flowed back and forth in its hands, and it was also black. A bright light shone from behind the creature. I remember being able to see my posters on the wall behind where it stood, but there was no other light in the room, other than what was emanating from him. As soon as I saw it, I was just paralyzed. I was trapped in my body, and I couldn't move, and now my chest hurt even more since I couldn't breathe. I don't know how much time passed with me in this state, but after a while I could feel my body begin to come back to me. At first my toes began twitching, then my fingers and eyelids, and then a rush of sensation came back to me. I was finally able to breathe and move around again, but the creature was still there. I had no idea what to do. If I was to run out of the room, I would have to push past the thing, as he was very near the entrance to my room, and I did not want that thing touching me again. I tried talking to it, asking who he was and what did he want, why did he hit me. I told him to leave, but he just wouldn't respond. He just kept looking down at what he was folding in his hands and would look back up at me every so often, like he was making sure I was staying put. Something told me, though, that somehow this thing had known what I was dreaming and that he had used the dream to attack me and wake me up, or something like that at least. The longer he stayed there, the more afraid I became, though. I tried pinching myself, closing and opening my eyes, and it was still there. I lived in Los Angeles, and this was a few months after the Northbridge earthquake. After having lived through that, I had this fear of being trapped in my room from a quake, so for a long while I would just store supplies near my bed, bottles of water, saltine crackers, and a flashlight. I kept the flashlight under my pillow, in fact. It's hard to describe, but it was like I heard this voice in my head, trying to help me through this encounter. It reminded me about the flashlight, but told me not to let this thing see me get it. I had no idea what I was going to do with a flashlight against this thing, but it was all I had, so I pretended that I thought I was dreaming, and that I was going back to bed. As I laid down, I could see the posture of the shadow creature change. It seemed to become antsy, paying more attention to me, but it would just not stop folding the liquid cloth. I grabbed the flashlight and cracked open my eyes to make sure it was still there. It was, and as I sat up and turned the flashlight on to shine at it, the voice told me to shine it where its heart would be, if it had a heart. As soon as the light hit it, the creature just kind of imploded into nothingness. I could see a spiral of darkness and light for a few seconds, and then it was just gone. And the next morning, I had a bruise on my chest where I'd been hit. I never saw the shadow creature again. I've had a couple of experiences in my life that I wondered if it was tied to, but could never be sure. Fast forward to now, though, 25 years later. I'm married with 2 beautiful children. My first child, my son, seems to have a bit of a psychic twinkle, I suppose. He's predicted a few things before they happened and has shared a couple of dreams with me. He's been showing me signs of this stuff since he was first learning to speak, but his little sister never really seemed to have the same sixth sense as him. That is, until now. A few months ago, my 5-year-old daughter began to tell me about dreams that she was having, about a shadow man. In her first dream, she dreamt that she had woken up to use the bathroom. When she finished using the toilet, she opened the door to the bathroom to leave and saw him on the other side of the door. The shadow man apparently chased her, trying to grab her, and ended up biting her on her finger. She's had a number of dreams about the shadow man chasing her over the past few months. She says that he has somehow turned her good dreams into bad dreams and is afraid of him. I've never told her or my son about my encounter with a shadow person. With the story that she's told me about her shadow man, though, she's always been clear that she's only seen him while she's sleeping and dreaming. Until today. She was at her preschool today, having a snack. She was standing by a table where her snack and milk was, and she looked up at the entrance to her classroom, and she saw the shadow man from her dreams outside the doorway to the classroom. It scared her so badly that she knocked over a milk box. She tried to point it out to her classmates, but no one else saw him. She says, though, that the shadow man ran away when he saw that she could see him. To be completely honest with you guys, I just don't know what to do. And my husband, even though he's a believer in the paranormal possibilities, thinks that she just has an overactive imagination. He's not saying that she's lying, but thinks that she didn't really see what she thinks she saw. The way that she speaks to me about this shadow man and the details that she tells me about the dreams just gives me chills. It reminds me so much of what I encountered as a kid, and I don't want my daughter to be scared of this thing, and I don't want her to have dreams about this thing anymore, but I don't think telling her something like it's not real is just going to help. I also don't think that telling her that I think it's real is going to help either, though. I remember my parents not believing me after my experience, and to be quite frank, it hurt. But they would tell me not to be silly or dramatic, even though I knew what had happened to me was real and I was terrified of it. At least I was older when I had my experience, but my daughter is only 5. I also don't know for sure if this is anything paranormal at all, or if it's psychological or what. It very well could be that she's just having reoccurring nightmares inspired by something scary that she saw on TV. Whatever this is, though, I don't think she's being silly or dramatic, and I don't think she's lying. It's definitely real to her. And if this is paranormal, what the hell is it then? Is it the same thing that attacked me? Is it now going after my kid? But why? Or is it a completely different thing altogether? If you're still listening, then thank you. And if you have any ideas or similar experiences, I'm open to hearing them. It was 2002. I was living with my boyfriend in a small home, just the two of us. The layout of the bedroom is important to the story too, so I'll describe it. So we had a small bedroom with a queen bed. The bed was pushed into a corner with the right side up against a wall and the left side with a small nightstand and just a small amount of room to walk beside the bed. And when you walked into the room, the foot of the bed was immediately to your right, closet door to the left. So, one night, my boyfriend and I are asleep. I slept on the left near the walkway because I tend to get up to pee a lot, when I wake up suddenly in the middle of the night. The room is dark, but my eyes are adjusted and I can pretty much see everything. I didn't know why I woke up, but right when I did, my dog Daisy came walking into the bedroom, walking right up to me and started happily sniffing my face like she was glad that I was awake. And walking right behind my dog was my boyfriend. But something was just off about him. He walked with tiny little steps, almost comical in nature, and his head was down, making his long hair cover his face. But I could tell it was him. Same clothes, same hair, same body, shape, everything. He baby stepped all the way around the bed and right up behind my dog though. And when he made it up behind her, she looked back at him and then just walked away, leaving the bedroom entirely. I watched both of them the whole time this took place, and I wasn't scared or confused. I was just kind of watching. Then, my boyfriend baby stepped closer to me and then leaned in over me, his hair still covering his face. He was leaned so far over me, in fact, that I thought he was looking for something. That's when I got confused, and I was just about to ask, "What the hell are you doing?" when I glanced over to his side of the bed, and to my horror, there was my sleeping boyfriend. I cannot explain the overwhelming surge of fear and panic that I felt in that moment. I was frozen with fear. I couldn't make a single sound, in fact. And when I turned towards the person I thought was my boyfriend, it quickly and swiftly leaned up straight and stepped backwards into my curtains and just completely disappeared. And that's when I was finally able to scream, and I screamed my lungs out. I had no answers and no clue on earth what I had just seen. My super Christian friend told me that it was a demon, that it took the form of my boyfriend. She explained her reasons, but I've since forgotten what she had told me, and for years after that, nothing like that ever happened to me again. That is, until 2018. So, it was summer break, 2018. My boyfriend and I had a son in 2005, but we broke up shortly after, unfortunately. He is a good dad, and we split amicably. The now ex-boyfriend stops by fairly often, and if I don't hear him at the door, he'll come on in. So one night, my elderly pug woke me up barking. He sleeps right in my armpit, basically, so I immediately noticed what he was barking at. It was my ex-boyfriend, and he was leaning into my bedroom door and he was just smiling at me, with the pug steadily barking at him. As soon as I looked at him, I was immediately just annoyed. He woke me up. So in my sleepy annoyance, I say, "What do you want?" And he's still leaning in my door, still smiling at me. "What?" I yell, really pissed by this point. And then he just shuts the door. That actually really angered me even further because I felt like he'd awakened me for something, but he wasn't talking or answering my questions. So I started shouting, I'm up, what is it?" And I fling the covers off of me, and in a matter of seconds, I open up my bedroom door expecting him to be standing there, but there's just nothing. It's just my dark hallway. Not quite grasping what was going on, I walk around my house trying to find him, and he's just not there at all. Now, it had been so long since it first happened that I was more shocked than scared. I don't scare too easily these days, I suppose, so I text him right away, and he still remembers the first time this happened to me, even though he dismissed it the first occurrence as a really vivid dream, despite me being adamant that I was fully awake when it happened. So I was surprised by his reaction to this second occurrence. He actually believed me. What really sold him was my pug, Mr. Muggs. He barked a lot at whatever was leaning into my bedroom door. But something else I didn't realize until I was texting my ex is the fact that Mr. Muggs never barks at him. He honestly loves my ex. So in the end, I just kind of chalk it all up to another sighting of an entity that looks exactly like my ex, and 15 years after the first time, which was really, really odd to say the least, but what can I do? A month or so goes by. I believe if you put too much thought and emotion into the paranormal, it can feed on that, so I just brushed it off. I just didn't give it a second thought beyond the first day after it happened. It was weird, I must admit, but I just tried to forget it happened. That kind of thing. So, August of 2018, my niece found a little puppy in a ditch on the side of the road. I immediately fell in love and opted to adopt her. Her name is Peekaboo, if you must know, and my son and I fell head over heels in love with her. Every night she would whine to get into my bed with me and Mr. Muggs, and every night I happily obliged. But one night I woke up to my son standing at the side of my bed. Mum, he said, can I sleep with you in your bed and puppy? I was not happy that he woke me. I said, you can see the puppy tomorrow, son. But he begged me, please, I want to sleep in the bed with you and the puppy. I was not having it though, so I told him, no, I barely have room as it is, go to bed. He hung his head down, but he didn't say anything else, and I watched as he left. I was already feeling guilty too, and just as he shut the door, I had a change of heart. I called out, come back, I'm sorry, as I threw back the covers and quickly opened my door. And my stomach sank when I opened the door and saw nothing. The hallway was empty, dark, and quiet once again. No lights, no sounds, and it had only been a few seconds from the time my son shut my door to the point where I was opening it back up. I definitely would have seen him, so I quickly walked to my son's room, opened his door, and there he was, sound asleep in his bed. Now, I didn't want to freak him out, so the next day I simply asked him, so did you come into my room last night? And he responded with a yes, in fact. I was relieved until he added, when I came to tell you goodnight, remember? And that was hours before I had seen him in my room that night, wanting in my bed. I never told him what happened that night, and it hasn't happened again. I hope it never does, because it does actually scare me a lot. I mean, it spoke. It wanted in my bed. I talked to it. What if I had said yes too? I shudder at that thought. I don't know what to make of this and why I see these things that just look like my loved ones. I have heard other doppelganger stories, but my experience is a little different from others that I've heard. Are they ghosts or demons? I have no idea, but I'm certainly curious to hear your thoughts. I was at home alone in my previous apartment, in a not-so-great neighborhood. My apartment was on the ground level, and my bedroom window faced a back alley. A dumpster sat less than 2 car lengths away, where homeless people often rummaged, and just before dawn one morning I heard a tapping at my window. My back was to the window, and my eyes were now wide open. It was still dark outside, but I slept with my lamp on and my worn-out vertical blinds were missing a slat, causing a 6-inch gap. So I knew that whoever or whatever the source of the tapping could see me lying in bed as plain as day. The tapping was brief, maybe 5 or 6 taps, so I spent the next 5 seconds or so pretty much frozen, bizarrely trying to convince myself that it was something or anything else but a person watching me and tapping on my window. Maybe an animal or something. But then came more tapping, and now I was faced with the terrifying reality that someone had been watching me through my window in the dark for God knows how long, and they decided to tap on the window. Had one of the homeless people become more aggressive during their dumpster dive? Something told me that nothing good could come from turning around and looking at the window. If he got me to look at him, what then? I remember too that my back was to the guy, so I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes and pretending that I was too groggy to hear him. I stood up and easily made my way out of the bedroom as though I were going to the restroom or something. Once I was out of sight, I ran to the phone to dial 911 though, considering whether to forget any embarrassment of being in my t-shirt and underwear and bolt out my front door, which was out of sight from the intruder. I just wasn't sure though if I could outrun whoever it was or whether anyone would help me if I couldn't. Before I could make a decision though, I heard the loud pop of my window being pried open. I thought my heart would jump out of my chest, and at the same time I could hear my upstairs neighbour, Mike, descending his stairs. I opened my door a few inches and peeked out to ask for his help. Mike was a big guy, and I'd heard that he was trained in martial arts of some sort, and he didn't hesitate to respond, hustling to the back of my apartment to see what was going on. But within a few seconds, I heard rumbling and someone being thrown against the wall and into the bushes. A few moments later, Mike came around to my front door, telling me not to worry about seeing that guy again. He'd apparently beaten him up pretty badly. I wanted to believe Mike, that the would-be intruder was maybe dumpster diving, but that he would hopefully never venture this way again. But strangely, it wasn't actually a homeless person. According to Mike, when the guy escaped, he ran to the front of my building, hopped into a red sports car, and sped off. My neighborhood wasn't a red sports car kind of place. The police later told me that the intruder was likely someone who'd seen me out somewhere and followed me home to find out where I lived. I still wonder what would have happened if Mike hadn't have got inside before that guy did. I also wonder now if the guy is still following me, and because of that, I often find myself wishing that Mike had maybe put an end to him. Several years ago, I decided to make the stupid decision of moving in with my now ex-boyfriend, Bob. It just seemed logical at the time instead of paying 2 rent payments. We were actively looking for months, and he stumbled upon a house for rent in a fairly nice and convenient area of town. The owner had another person interested in the house, but he told Bob that if he came that day to look at the house and sign the lease, that it would be ours. I was at work, but I trusted him. I was young and very naive, so stupid, and I just let him do it. Later that day, I met Bob at the house and do a walkthrough together for the first time. I pulled up in front of the house, and as soon as I saw it, I just couldn't get out of the car. He was already there waiting for me on the porch, but I instantly started tearing up because I just knew somehow that something was terribly wrong with this house. But at this point, it was just too late. We had committed to it for an entire year. The house was an older house, but just remodeled to look new. It had an odd setup too, with a main bedroom in the front that attached to the living room and the kitchen. There were 2 extra smaller bedrooms in the back of the house attached to the laundry room. There was 1 bathroom that was attached to both the main bedroom and living room, and it had 2 doors. I have a very long history with hauntings, and I'm still convinced that I have attachments with me at my current residence, so it wasn't surprising when unusual things began to happen. Doors slamming, lights flickering, footsteps, voices. However, I quickly found out that this thing did not want us there. Bob worked evenings, so I was usually home a majority of the time by myself, and it only took a week before I saw his full apparition in the laundry room. I was cooking dinner and heard the dogs growling toward the back door. I looked over, and a man was just standing there looking at me. He was really tall with dark hair. He was always wearing a red flannel shirt and had a really angry or blank expression on his face. We locked eyes, and he just walked into the spare bedroom and disappeared. The longer we lived in that house too, the more violent things became. The whole house would shake sometimes, and we couldn't keep anything on the walls. We were watching TV one night, and a picture on the wall just shattered like it had been punched. Another time we were cooking dinner, and we both saw a glass lift off the counter and slam against the wall, barely missing Bob's face. I think one of the scariest moments for me personally was when I was taking a bath one night. I was just relaxing and had the curtain closed when I saw a dark shadow on the other side of the curtain. Thinking that it was Bob, I started talking to him, but my heart dropped when I heard the TV on in the living room and heard Bob on the phone. I don't think one can describe the feeling that I had run through me at that time when I realized that my ex was not the person standing on the other side of the shower curtain. It took every ounce of courage that I had to jump up and pull back the curtain. I started screaming for Bob, and at the same time, one of the bedroom doors slammed shut, the other was already closed, and I could hear Bob trying everything that he could to get to me. I was screaming, and he was screaming, and the dogs were barking and growling, and it was just absolutely terrifying. The doors weren't locked, but neither of us could get them to open, and after about a 15-minute struggle, both doors just opened and everything went quiet. After that incident too, I begged Bob to move. He was working almost every night, and at this point I couldn't stand to be alone in that house anymore. I felt like a prisoner and began to isolate myself to the main bedroom because that seemed where the least amount of activity was. But one night I woke up in the middle of the night and saw the man standing in the doorway to the bedroom, but he never came into the room. My relationship with Bob began to deteriorate because he didn't understand how much the entity was affecting me. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, and my physical and mental health were just dropping. People laugh at me when I blame it on something supernatural, but it was unhealthy for me to stay in that house. I had to leave, and eventually I did. Like my other stories too, I constantly ask myself, why me? I'd never faced off with something like this. I had encountered plenty of negative things before, but this was different. This felt like a physical attack. Bob was just lucky enough to also witness it at the time. Otherwise, I'm sure that he would have thought that I was completely mad. I guess my question to you guys, though, is do people attract spirits or something? Or is it just a coincidence that I moved into another haunted house? And if it is coincidence, why do I still feel like I'm never alone? My grandmother met my grandfather when they were in high school, became high school sweethearts, wrote letters to each other when my grandfather was deployed in World War II, and eventually they married. In the 1950s, they moved into a tiny two-bedroom, 900-foot square house in Oklahoma that was built in the 1930s. I don't know if it was due to their values or if later in life there was a strain in their relationship, but they each slept in different bedrooms. I never met my grandfather. He passed away before I was born. My grandmother never remarried, just continued to live in this house until she passed away in 2009. She always left my grandfather's room the way it was when he was alive, and before she passed away, she sold her house to my brother, who had just recently married his wife. When my brother moved in, he began to remodel the house, and that was when we began to experience a few weird things. So my brother was an entrepreneur and started a private security business. He ended up converting my grandfather's bedroom into an office. My brother began telling his wife that when he would walk out of the office and into the hallway, he would hear a growling sound just over his shoulder. She thought that my brother was just trying to scare her, but then she began to hear the growling sound too. One day, while sitting at his office desk, he felt like someone was leaning on his office chair, leaning it back, when all of a sudden the whole chair moved forward while he was still leaning back, causing him to hit his elbow on his desk and bruise it pretty badly. Another day, he and his wife were sitting in the front room watching TV when he heard two of his three cats just start growling. They were looking towards the office with their hair standing on end. They heard a crashing noise, and the third cat came sprinting out of the office and into the front room, where it stopped and looked back into the office. Then the computer mouse came flying out of the room, just missing the cat. The worst thing that happened, though, was one very late night in August, about 2 a.m., my brother gets a call from one of his employees. He takes the call to his office to conduct business, and while trying to talk to the employee states, "I'm sorry, I don't know if that's your wife talking, but I'm having a hard time hearing you." My brother informs him that his wife is asleep and it's just him in the office. Right after he says this, my brother hears my mum's voice coming from the front door saying, "Hello, hello," and my brother tells his employee, "I have to call you back. My mum is here. She lives an hour away and it's not like her to be here." He eventually gets to the front door and opens it, and no one is there. My brother goes outside, no car, no one around. He says, though, that it's unusually cold. He can see his breath condensate. He turns and looks into the front room through the window, and he sees a woman, dressed in all white, walk from the office, through his front room, into his kitchen, and out into his garage. He says that he immediately has an overwhelming sense of sadness come over him, and he begins to cry uncontrollably. He rushes inside to wake up his wife, who tells him to leave her alone, but after a few attempts, she wakes up and asks, "What's wrong?" Before he can explain, there are multiple loud crashes coming from the garage, and my brother tells her that they need to leave right now. They go and drive around for an hour or so talking about what happened after this. They also call me and tell me what happened. At first I think it's a prank, but my brother is always serious, never religious, and doesn't believe in anything supernatural. They head back home to find the garage in just shambles. After these events, years go by with no other incidents. My brother had a daughter, and he converted the office into a bedroom for her. He walks by her room one day, and when she's laying down for a nap, he hears what sounds like a man talking in a room, a popping sound, and then her crying. After going into the room, the electrical outlet next to her crib is sparking and just singed. She's 4 years old now, and nothing else has happened since that incident, but I have house-watched for him quite a few times, and I haven't personally experienced anything that I would say is paranormal. Closest thing I can say is I woke up with a feeling like something heavy was on my legs, like a cat, but none of them were around. Oh, and I remember seeing a dark shadow too that looked like a person moving away from the foot of the bed once I woke up, but it could have just been my eyes adjusting, I suppose. So, a little pretext. I was up late till 1:30 a.m. binging Game of Thrones, laid down around 2 a.m. and was asleep for about an hour until this happened. Before I woke up, I caught the end of a dream where a group of people were in a Toyota SUV. 2 were in the back, a woman in the front passenger seat, noticeably distressed. The guys come rushing to the driver's seat and start it up, and she jumps in terror clutching a silver object. My brain for some reason tells me that it's iron, but while she looks on in terror, all I see is nothing and a round stone base. Also, I do remember something standing, blurred or out of focus, but then, cue me waking up. Now, I've seen this thing flowing from my hallway ceiling a handful of times before, but not like this. So, to get on with it though, it's kind of like a shadowy, almost solid flowing kind of mass coming from my hallway, which had me spooked, but I've seen this type of thing before, so it was kind of no biggie. It was kind of a, I don't mess with you and you keep going on and being creepy all the way over there, as I keep a close eye on it, but then I look on and I keep studying it, and it forms multiple sets of these kind of multicolored eyes, at 10 to 15 sets in random places. Then I notice mouths appearing, and then I could see the jagged teeth, and then the faces start to form. At this point, I turn on my phone flashlight in a discreet scramble, and nothing. As soon as there's any light, it usually vanishes, but it was moving closer this time, and the mass grew in size as it became more defined. I threw the sheets over my head and just sat there breathing heavily for a few minutes, and then I slowly peeked out again, and it was gone. To be honest with you guys, I think after typing this, I feel like it might be coming from the attic that I've been warned to actually not go into. It's a rented house, and it's supposedly super gross and dirty up there, but I don't know, I think something fishy's going on here. Also, I would like to add that this black mass that appears is located a yard from where my 6-year-old brother sleeps. I hadn't thought about that fact actually until I started sharing this with you guys. I do hope that someone out there believes me, because I'm not one to lie. It's never given any real benefit to my life, in fact. I like to think of myself as a pretty logical person, and I know that most crazy happenings can be explained away with science and logic, but today was just way too much. I've always felt various things around me, the goosebump kind of feeling, and have noticed bright glowing eyes at night. I've seen animals at night, and I can assure you that it's not them, and that I'm not mistaking this. Also, before I forget to mention this, during all of this there was a tall dark figure, kind of hunched on the ceiling tall, with his or her hand on the support column or wall. Its body was shadowy and undefined, but the hand had detail with long pointed fingers, almost had a kind of gloss to it as well, but still had shadows flowing from it. It's appeared solo or lurked where the masses appeared before, like it's the one behind it all. Only once has it ever put its hand on the opposite side of the doorframe though, which is kind of weird. And I yelled and threw something at it that time. If you guys have any ideas on what I'm dealing with here, please let me know, because this whole situation is beginning to terrify me. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, I lived in a very weird house. It had some serious history with what it had been and how it was built. The house itself was built in 1910, and sometime around 1940, the front of the house was expanded with a large storefront-style front end added that was turned into a repair shop of some kind. When the expansion to the house happened, they extended the basement. The basement was a long corridor, about 60 feet long, but this is where it kind of got weird. In the early 60s, it went from being a repair shop to an underground brothel, and the basement had a whole line of rooms on the left side that were big enough for a twin bed and a night table. There were 7 rooms like this, each the same as before in design. At the very end of the basement was one larger room, which was about the size of a king-size bed, I would say, to give a visual image. Along the main corridor were pillars in the middle of the walkway outside of each room, and they all had large loops like you would find for tying up horses or cattle, but the house had no history of being a farm-based house. In the early 70s, though, there was a man who managed to kill 7 of the working ladies at the brothel, and then just ended himself. The city obviously shut it down at this point, and it was sold later to be turned into a concert hall in the front storefront area. So, needless to say, the house was interesting at best, but for a bunch of 17 and 18-year-olds, it was one of the best places ever to rent. It was a constant party house, but it was ours. The front area we turned into a lounge with a crap load of couches and tables for doing what teens in their first place do best. In the end, the house was paid for by me and 3 other friends. Before living here, I didn't believe in ghosts or any of that. But after living in that house, even to this day, I don't fully know how to explain the events that occurred, but it all started out when the unexplained things that we just thought were someone else in the house began. So one day, my friends and I were all sitting in the back room of the house when we heard a loud crash. We looked out to see the light in the kitchen strobing, and our ferret was screaming, who he kept in a cage in the kitchen dining area. But we heard another slam and could see this cage in the light slide past the doorway. We obviously run out to what the hell was going on, but when we entered the kitchen, there was nothing there. Just our little dude freaking the hell out. We could never figure out what was going on, but when this happened, it got all of us talking about our own events. Over the course of the next few months, we started to gain a feeling for each one of the, well, for a lack of a better term, spirits. They shared the house with us, obviously, and I don't know how to put it, but we felt that there were at least 2 good, warm-feeling spirits and one really angry and violent one. We started having physical interactions with them, which to this day I can't fully explain other than that it felt like a warm hand on your shoulder kind of experience, and then the other which resulted in what looked like burns and scratches. When we lived here, we had a set of 3 paintings that made up one painting, and when we put them on the wall in the correct order, they would get ripped off the wall sometimes, and we would come home to them on the other side of the room, and other times it would happen with us watching, like when we were sitting around drinking or whatever else. Now, if we put them up in the wrong order, nothing ever really happened to them, and in the end they just lived in the wrong order for this reason. We had a number of stereos in the house too, and they would all go to white noise after listening to them. These were the old style with the knobs to change the stations around, so we ended up taping them in place, but they would still sometimes, somehow, go to the white noise anyway. After living here for 2 years, we gave names to them too. Rose and Jill for the two that we can only assume were two working girls or something. And Henry, the killer we dubbed the mean one that would inflict pain and anger to the rooms. And Henry would also slam doors and cupboards, sometimes would throw plates or glasses. And when we would take showers, the mirrors would show handprints in the condensation, and we would hear what sounded like faint women talking when no one else was home. One night, though, my friend and I were throwing a Nerf football back and forth. The ball bounced and hit a large white vase that was in the house when we moved in. It fell over and crashed on the floor into pieces. And we felt like it must have been Henry angry because both of us instantly felt burns and had scratches on our backs. It was the raised well kind of scratches, and his activity levels just skyrocketed for the next week or so. I don't really know what brought me to share all of this, but in the end it felt therapeutic to tell someone for the first time outside of my friend circle about everything that's happened to us. There were lots of other events that happened too, but this'll do for now, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. So I told a story a few weeks back about some whistling in the woods by the back of my house that really spooked one of my dogs, and I don't know if you guys remember it, but it's been kind of an ongoing situation for a while now. So that kind of thing kept going on for about a week, I'd say, maybe 2 at most, and then really everything just kind of stopped. Nothing strange or suspicious has happened at all for the past month, in fact. It's been really calm. The dogs have been great, other than my largest dog being diagnosed with cancer, which is a bit of a shame, but otherwise really quiet. I'm pretty sure I kept hearing whistling for about 2 weeks, but it died down pretty fast, and whatever was going on really seems to have stopped. Or well, I thought it had at least. Last night, though, I fell asleep on the couch after watching the basketball game, Warriors vs. the Blazers, and I woke up abruptly to a knock on my bedroom door. It's an exterior door, because I filled in my carport as a master suite about 10 years back, so the knock came from that door, and I woke up pretty scared, but still pretty unalert. I get to the door after a few seconds and decide that I have to open it and see what, if anything, is knocking. And when I open it, there's nothing there, which, to be honest, is pretty typical lately. But anyway, I have no idea what it was. It could have literally been anything, so I'm kind of just too tired to think, and I just went back to bed and went to sleep. That's cool, right? Nothing weird. But when I woke up this morning, I opened that door, remembering being woken up overnight, and still nothing. Well, not at first. But then I look down, and then I see just blood everywhere. At first I'm like, what the heck is that? But I get a closer look, and I confirm that it's definitely blood. And I just say to myself, what the hell is going on? There was definitely no whistling, but what is all this blood from? And why is it at my door? And I can also see what looks like paw prints. But my dogs were all inside the house by 11:30 and didn't go back outside until around 7:45 in the morning. Guys, I'm actually starting to get a bit scared now, seriously, because whoever or whatever is responsible for this obviously hasn't gone yet, and I'm still dealing with this situation. Plus, it seems to be escalating now. So in the 80s, my aunt, Em, had actually won $14 million in the lottery. But with her winnings too, she made her own house from scratch on this big plot of land. It's still there today, in fact, but owned and renovated by its new owners. My uncle that bought her the ticket had unfortunately died in the year 2000 from an abrupt heart attack, so needless to say, she moved out of her dream home because it was just too much for her to bear. She still owned the house for quite a while. She didn't live in it, but she had made up a new house from scratch to live in with her new husband. Her previous house was vacant for years and years, and in 2013 or 14, I think, she couldn't afford to pay the lot rent for both places. My younger cousin, my older cousin, and I, as well as our dads and uncles and older cousin's close family friend, went there before she sold it to get family mementos and reminisce about the good times. From the beginning, this was hard to do because after years of abandonment, it had no lights or water and was overgrowing on the inside. But at around 4 in the morning one day, after hearing the weirdest noises ever, which I now think was just an old house dying. I mean, the house was huge and had a basement and then another basement underneath that and was built in the 80s. We decided to go out back and decompress and say our goodbyes around a fire before going home. So, there are 4 levels to the house, 2 above ground and 2 below ground, and on every level there was some way to get out of the house directly to the yard. We were all walking up these long bomb shelter-like stairs from the bottom basement to the yard, and my older cousin's friend that came with, B, had to go back down for something that he left. The stairs came out of a hill, so it was such a long hike up that we were all like, we just walked all the way up here and we're just going to go back down? About 10 minutes passed after coming out, and we had the fire all set up though, and were sitting around it, and all the adults noticed B hadn't come back yet. But they joked saying that he got stuck or lost or something, but eventually the jokes just weren't really funny anymore. My dad and Uncle L went down to look for him and came back up to say that they just couldn't find him anywhere. It was at this point that my younger cousin and I started freaking out because we were scared and pretty young, like 14 or 15, and the other adults started tripping out and worrying because all the doors got locked before we left. We all left the sub-basement door, which was the only one left to lock. My dad and Elle went down again to check if all the doors were still locked, and they were. Also, some backstory on B too is that he's too large and physically incapable of getting through a window. In fact, he could barely lift his leg up past his knee. We all decided to sit there, though, just waiting for B to come out of this door that's about 10 yards away from us, when all of a sudden he calls my older cousin saying, "I don't know what to tell you, but I just woke up at my house." B lived over 40 miles away at this time, and my older cousin just started uncontrollably sobbing. My younger cousin's dad, Zed, said, "It's time to go now," and starts to get up to throw water on the fire, when, out of the deafening silence, this sound that was unbearably loud just shook all of us. It honestly sounded like a giant generator just getting shut off. Me and my younger cousin, my dad, and my older cousin immediately started screaming. "Did you guys hear that?" But my uncles, Zed and Elle, were totally stuck like something out of a late-night episode of The Twilight Zone. Zed was in a position of getting up, but was just kind of stuck there, frozen where he was. Elle was laughing at everybody, but then all of a sudden just wasn't anymore. He was just there, open mouth, crinkled eyes, smiling like he did while laughing. My dad and older cousin started shaking them, and my dad was freaking out and must have thought that they died or something because he just kept saying, "Please, no, Elle, please don't do this." But my younger cousin and I were absolutely terrified, obviously, in every meaning of the word. My dad and older cousin took us back up to the car and locked it, despite us crying our eyes out because we didn't want to be left alone, and then they went back. I don't know how long passed, but soon enough, lights came up from the hills and it was all of them walking towards us. My dad decided my younger cousin was going to stay with us for the night, and Elle and Zed just went home without looking in our direction or saying anything to us. We kept asking my dad and older cousin what exactly was even happening and what was going on, and my dad just kept saying, "For as long as we live, we will never talk to you guys or anyone about this night ever." 4 different times in this long rant about not knowing what life was anymore, my older cousin turned and looked at us dead in the eyes and said, "There are some things that you just want to accept as never being able to know the real answers to." And after that, we just rode home in silence. My younger cousin and I talked about it at least once a month since it happened, but never dared to talk to them about it because of the one time we tried and they had gotten belligerently mad because we kept pressing about it. My younger cousin and I have had a conversation about it, summing up that we fabricated the whole story or something, knowing well enough that we must have been lying to each other, especially considering that we still talk about it to this day, and that exact conversation was years ago. Honestly, the whole situation is just really weird, and I know that this is a strange one, but if anyone has any direction to point me to for possible explanations or information, or even clues, I would greatly appreciate it. So this happened a long time ago, probably when I was about 8, I'd say. For context, at this point in time, I shared a bedroom with my 2 brothers. One of my brothers and I shared a bunk bed, and I was on the top bunk. To prevent me from falling off, there was a metal bar around the top bunk, which is important to the story later. So one night, for a reason that I couldn't understand, my mother woke me up and asked me to come talk to her and my dad in their room. She wouldn't tell me why, but I did what she said and went into my parents' bedroom. And this is when things got really weird. From here on out, I don't remember certain things about the conversation. I don't remember actually going into my parents' bedroom, I don't remember any specific details, and I don't remember how long the conversation lasted for even. I know I said that this happened a long time ago, but even the day after this happened, I couldn't remember the conversation really well. It was as if I was just fading in and out of consciousness or something, losing track of my memory. The only 2 things that I can definitely remember is talking about Lego Star Wars. No clue why. I didn't have that game at the time. And my parents asking me who was my dad, despite my dad sitting right next to me. Then, somehow, I ended up in my bed again, asleep. And to be honest with you, I don't even remember going back into my room to go to sleep again. Anyway, the next day rolls around and my parents briefly talk about it, but I'm kind of unsure about what happened, almost doubting it. It wasn't until a few years later my parents told me what was actually going on when I asked about the incident. So on that night, my parents woke to a loud banging noise coming from my room. Scared that someone was inside, my mum investigated. And as it turns out, I was making the noise by bashing my head against my pillow repeatedly with no signs of stopping. Scared and confused, my mum went over to me and quietly said my name and asked if I was alright. I stopped bashing my head at this point and turned to face her. My eyes were wide open and expressionless, according to her. And then, all of a sudden, I slammed my head into the metal bar surrounding my top bunk really hard. Luckily, my mum had put a hand on it, which sort of cushioned it for me, but hurt my mum in the process. I then look at her and just say unintelligible words, then close my eyes and go back to sleep. However, I doubt that I ever woke up, as I honestly cannot remember any of this for the life of me. My mum leaves, explains this to my dad, and this is when they decide to wake me up and take me into their room to ask if I'm okay. This is where things get even weirder too, because the little I can remember apparently just didn't happen at all. I was apparently talking absolute nonsense to them. Nothing I said made any sense to them. She couldn't even recall what I was talking about because of how little sense it made. But all of a sudden I stop and just became terrified. My mum asks what's wrong, and I say in the most horrified tone, "Mum, where's Dad?" She explained that Dad was right next to me and he was fine, and I look at him and just say, "I know." Turn back around, get scared again and say, "Mum, where's Dad?" And this went on for an hour apparently before they decided to just let me go back to sleep. Strangely enough too, nothing like that ever happened again. Maybe I had some sort of mental breakdown, maybe something else, I really don't know, but it was weird and creepy, and I honestly still get nervous thinking about it. So, I have two related stories that I'd like to share with you guys. So one time when I was 12, I was at the mall with my family. My sister wanted to go into one store and I wanted to go into another. My dad said, fine, go ahead, we'll be right over here. I went into the shop and was just looking at all the different albums and whatnot. And I specifically remember looking at a Whitesnake CD, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this man in his 40s, I'd say, come straight towards my way after entering the store. I knew right away, too, just by looking at him, that something just was not right. He stood right next to me and pretended to look at a CD, and moved closer to me after about a minute. I stood there pretending to still look and not make it obvious that I knew what was happening. I played it off and just moved around to the other set of CDs on the other side of the case and was going to make my way out casually, him still pretending to look but watching me. So I casually walked out, and as soon as I left, I darted to find my dad and everyone else, and I looked behind me to see if the guy was still following me. Then I went into the crowd to try and lose him, and he was trying to look above the crowd to find me, and he caught up eventually, but I was headed down the escalator by that time, and there I saw my dad, and I saw the man leaving into the Macy's. It was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me at the time, and I never really told anyone what happened that day. I'm a very shy person, and quite honestly, after thinking about it for some time, I thought that maybe I was just mistaken. So the next story is when me and my friend, we were both 15 and 16 at the time, female. We were out walking around at night, just kind of goofing around, no big deal. It wasn't extremely late, like 8 or 9 at night. I live in a really safe city, suburbs if you will, so we were just kind of walking around, doing whatever, and where I live there are 4 neighborhoods, all right next to each other, 2 across the street from me and 1 right next to my neighborhood. And there, for some reason, is just a stretch of pretty much no lights. Not a long stretch, but long enough to kind of be a little bit creepy, and then you're at the intersection and there's a grocery store at the plaza, which is important. So, we make our way around, ran into some guy banging on his door screaming at these people to let him in, and we stopped dead in our tracks and turned around at this point. He didn't see us, but it was definitely weird. He was in a UPS uniform. So, anyway, making our way back, we were walking through the grocery store plaza. I think we went in there for a second to get something and made our way back to the sidewalk, back to my house, when I noticed 3 people at the donation drop-off taking stuff out. Of course, this is where the no lights part begins. I didn't make it noticeable that I see this going on and just kept walking. My friend doesn't think anything of it, but I wanted to keep an eye on them because something just felt off about it. And as soon as we passed them and walked a little way, I looked back to make sure that we weren't being followed, and my heart just dropped. I see a figure running after us with a white bag in hand, and it was one of them. I told my friend to run, and we ran into the neighborhood right next to mine. Ironically enough, too, I didn't even think of this at the time, but we could have just hopped the fence of the people that lived behind us and been in my backyard, since nobody lived in that house at the time but didn't think of it at that moment. So we ran around this neighborhood and made a loop, and now we're afraid to leave because we weren't sure if these men were hiding somewhere to snatch us or what they were doing. So we walked out of the neighborhood in the middle of the entrance and walked into the middle of the street, walked down a little and got onto the sidewalk again just to make sure that he couldn't grab us if he was hiding up somewhere. I look behind me and we see this guy chasing us again. And at this point, we just ran. My neighborhood was right there, but I was so scared of him following me to my house that I made a couple of loops. I think we eventually lost him, and we ran so fast, just straight into my house and hid in my room for the rest of the night. Everybody was home, of course, so we felt safer, but still, I think it was a close call. This story took place in summer of 2017. I had joined the Canadian Army Reserve Infantry. Most infantry reserves from my part of Canada do their DP1 infantry course on a base known as 4C DTC or Mayford. It's been there just a really long time, and in the large training area there are many old ruins from what seems like pioneer times or something. but these mostly consist of old stone buildings that have been neglected for what seems like a century. Now, I've never been a superstitious person in the slightest, and I've never really believed in anything paranormal, but during my infantry course I had an encounter that still just gives me the chills 2 years later. So my section, about 8 guys and an instructor, we were doing nighttime navigation. The instructor would give us points on a map and we would have to make our way to it, but we had to stay off roads to keep concealed and whatnot. And if you'd never done it before, walking around in the woods at night is already creepy enough, but near the end of the night, probably around 3 a.m. I'd say, we were given a point and a map that just said ruins. Okay, whatever, let's just get this over with. In the training area it is 90% just forest and a few dirt roads and a couple of gun ranges, but mostly nature has taken over at this point. We get about 50 meters from the ruins and we notice the grass here has been mowed, which is weird considering that all the other ruins have just been left to rot. It was a pretty warm night too. It was in the middle of July, I'd say, and we'd been walking for hours at this point, but the temperature just all of a sudden seemed to drop. I figured it was just me being paranoid, so I kept it to myself. But it wasn't just me. We all felt like we were freezing out of nowhere. Even the instructor said something. And something just didn't seem right the closer we got to this thing. The ruins on the map were a singular well-kept cemented grave with a small new-looking chain-link fence around it. Everyone is noticeably uncomfortable. We try to call in that we found the point on our radio, but there's no signal. We had been standing there for maybe 2 minutes at this point when we hear loud rustling and loud creaking. And then my fire team partner almost flew forward as if someone pushed him, but when we all looked, no one was there. He got all pissy because he thought that we were messing with him, but we were just as freaked as him. And at this point, we just got out of there ASAP, and I haven't gone back to that area since. At the time, we didn't know this, but the base rumor said that the grave belonged to a girl who was hung for apparently being a witch. She is commonly known as Blue Eyes, and a lot of people have similar stories to ours. Mostly they sound fake, but once in a while I'll hear about temperature dropping and odd creaking, and I'll think back to that night. So this is a short one, but it's something that I've just never forgotten. So when I was 7, I was playing with a ball in the living room. Then I just felt the urge to look at the door, which was made of glass and wood with little windows. I looked and there was nothing there. After that, I just continued playing, but then the feeling hit me again. Look at the door, my brain was telling me, so I looked again. And there it was. On one of the little windows, an old lady that seemed like she was at least 100 years old, who looked completely like a creepy old witch, was just staring directly at me, laughing without sound, and finally pointing her finger at me. Panicking, I ran to the only point of the room where you couldn't see the door and stayed there looking at the ground, because in the same room there was a mirror that reflected to the door. A couple of minutes passed, time to go to bed. At this time my mother was with me. I looked again to see if the old lady was still there, and nothing. That night, I went to sleep with the blankets over my head. So about 8 months back, I was getting a hefty amount of sleep paralysis, and I've had quite a few troubling and strange encounters that I'd like to share here. I hope you guys enjoy this. So the first one that I can recall was way back in the 7th grade. I was around 13 at the time, I'd say, and going through a very toxic part of my life. I remember going to bed one night and seeing a strange figure standing next to my TV at the foot of the bed. It was tall, probably around 5'11", and surrounded by a black mist. Whatever this thing was had shown up multiple times in my peripheral vision as a kid as well. It didn't feel too dangerous. It felt more like possibly a friend even. And for some reason, a small voice in my head always referred to it as Noah, and so I call it that nowadays. The second one was a strange combination between the rake and SCP-096 with big butter-coloured bug eyes. It ranged to around 6'5", it usually having to hunch over to not bump its head on the ceiling. Really, really skinny, with pale yellowish skin and extremely bony. Its arms had very long clawed fingers and its nails usually dragged on the floor. No mouth was ever seen either. I've only ever seen stretch marks where one would be. And this weird fellow always seemed to just show up whenever it was really, really late, and the message was, "You need to go to bed and go to sleep," would drone in my head whenever I saw it in my room. Not harmful either, just really terrifying and usually scared me to sleep. For the greater good, I suppose. I ended up naming him Butter Eyes for his very notable face. But the last one is nowhere near as nice as the other two. I've done my fair slice of reading around and haven't found any information about this thing, but I have a feeling that there's got to be information somewhere. So it was a night at the final stretch of my 8th grade school year. I headed to sleep and was out for a good few hours, I'd say, before the paralysis kicked in sometime around 2 or 3 a.m. What I remember is feeling choked and cold and just being dragged up to sit up on my bed. And there was a black goat with a dapper dark grey suit with a red jewel at the tie length walking out of my closet and flicking his hand. He flung me out of my bed and onto the floor in the middle of the room. He walked over to me and stared at me with his crimson-coloured eyes. I floated up to his waist at this point, him standing around 6 foot tall and a concrete platform with the usual ritual candles appear below me. He took his black-gloved hand and shoved it into my gut, just below my belly button. I do remember thrashing around as my arms and legs were stretched out and unable to move. His right forearm disconnected, leaving a wispy ghost-like one in his place, and he pulled his arm back out. He'd left a part of him in me, and the platform disappeared. I was dropped onto the floor with a thud. He looked back at me as he walked into my closet and flicked his left hand, putting me back into my bed under the covers. I woke up the next morning shaking and teary, and with the feeling of just like a lead ball in my gut for almost a week. I drew a cross on my stomach and kept it there until the feeling went away. The paranoia of whatever that was still coming back every so often, but with time the feeling faded. I know that all of this is just sleep paralysis and it's all on my head, but I still feel a heaviness in my gut today, like whatever that thing was, maybe it wasn't all just in my head. About 15 years ago, I lived in Sulphur, Oklahoma. My playground, the Chickasaw National Recreational Area, and I loved that park so much. I rode more miles on my bike there than anywhere else. I've walked nearly every trail and rode every road pretty much. Every day I would ride my mountain bike up and down the trails and would be home by nightfall most days. One night, however, I had rode out a bit further than usual. On my way back, however, I decided to ride the trail from an area known as Buffalo Springs, where they have live buffalo roam and there's a large spring fountain there for all to enjoy. As I was riding back, I knew the end of the trail was coming up, and I would have to cross a stone bridge across the creek and then up the road to my home. It was dark at the time, and all I had to use to see was the full moon. I was maybe a few hundred yards from it when I got a sharp pain in my left thigh. I stopped and looked around to see what just hit me. And then I heard a noise sounding like something hitting the ground hard in front of me. There was a rock about the size of a baseball just rolling across the trail. And there was a rock about the size of a baseball rolling across the trail. Me, confused, starts to look up at the side of this hill. And just as I turn my head to look, I almost fall off my bike when another rock comes flying down and hitting my front wheel. I finally have my eyes adjust to look and see someone very tall and dark and covered in hair at the top of the hill, throwing things at me and screaming. I yelled at the person that I had a cell phone and I was going to call the police. I didn't actually have one as I didn't have a cell phone yet, but this seemed to piss it off and he started charging down the hill at me. I, for obvious reasons, light up bike and I just took off. Just as I crossed the bridge, I heard a huge splashing noise in the creek and I saw a huge rock that had been thrown in there. I wasn't clear to go home at this point, but I was frightened all the way there. I went to a ranger station later the next morning and told a ranger that I knew there about what happened. And he says, "So, you were attacked by Bigfoot?" snidely laughing. I say, "I don't know what it was, but something was trying to hurt me out there." He says, "Okay, Justin, if I have any more Bigfoot, I'll let you know what we get." I just said fine at this and left. The very next week, I was riding again in the daylight when the ranger pulled up next to me and said for me to get in. I asked why, and he said that he needed to show me something. We headed to the police department in town, and before we got out of the car, he turns to me and says, "Justin, I have to give you a huge apology. I'll be honest that I didn't believe you when you told me that story that you'd been attacked. However, it's come to my attention that a couple was out in the same area last night and was attacked in the same way, saying that they'd seen a huge, large, hairy creature throwing rocks and sticks and screaming at them. They called the police and they came out with some of the other rangers, including myself, and I immediately thought about what you had told me. When we arrived and started up the hill, sure enough, we were having rocks and things thrown at us. Guns drawn and yelling, 2 officers tackled a man to the ground. He was 6'5" tall, naked, covered in mud, and had long hair and a large beard. He had escaped from the Veterans Center across Veterans Lake, and apparently he thought he was back in Vietnam and was trying to take out the enemy. And the ranger also said that I was really lucky because he was trying to kill me. We went inside so that I could give the police my statement as to what had happened. They had him sent to a more secure facility somewhere else, and to this day I still get the shivers when I hike that trail, and I always keep my eyes on the ridgetop. My great-grandfather was from northern Tennessee. He and most of my family have been known to be too nice to others. He would give the shirt off his back to pretty much anyone in need, and when he moved him and his wife and kids, they came through Little Rock, Arkansas, and my great-grandpa enjoyed a game of poker in a saloon and won the pot. It had a deed to a small home and an orchard in the Kiamichi Mountains in southeastern Oklahoma, and he loaded everyone up and moved there. My grandpa was born 3 months premature. My great-grandma was 6 months pregnant and went outside to pick pears off the tree in the front yard, and while doing so, she went into labor and out popped this tiny thing that would become my grandpa. They said that he was so tiny that he slept the first several weeks in a shoebox. The doctor said that he didn't think that he'd survive, but seeing him playing in the front yard 1 year later, he said, "Well, I think the boy just might make it." But anyway, on to the story. So, in 1924, my great-grandpa had been asked several times by different people to sell the land and the house that he and his family lived on. The land was worth a deal of money as it had a very fertile ground for that region, and the house was a decent-sized house, plus the orchard and whatnot. The great-grandpa and great-grandma didn't want to sell the land though, they just loved it too much. There was one person, though, that made several attempts to not only talk my great-grandpa into selling, but even tried to take my great-grandma away from my great-grandpa. He had a big crush on her, to say the least. And one day he came to the house just before sundown, and this is what I was told went down. But there was knocking on the door, and my great-grandpa said, "Oh, hey, how can I help you?" The guy said hi to my great-grandpa, and then my great-grandma, waving at her, and then said that I wanted to talk here to my great-grandpa about selling the land to me. I would give you all a great deal of money for it. My great-grandpa told the guy that he was not interested in selling the land, but then said, being it so late, "Have you eaten anything for supper?" The guy said, "No, I haven't, I'm famished." Great-grandpa then said, "Well, great-grandma has some beans in the pot and fresh cornbread in the oven. Like I said, I'm not interested in selling, but I'm always willing to listen, so come on in and have a seat." They both came in and sat down in the living room and talked a bit about the course of the land and other such things. The guest then asked where the bathroom was, and my great-grandpa told him through the kitchen and out the back door you'll see the outhouse. The man left and went out the back door, and he came in a few minutes later. The whole family was in the living room as he could see walking into the kitchen area. My great-aunt then says, "Excuse me, sir, what you doing?" And she was like 8 at the time. He says, "Oh, hi, and I'm just putting some salt in the beans." My great aunt then says, "But Ma has done this." He then says, "Oh, well, I thought it just needed a little more." Great aunt just said okay, then went off to the living room, and the man just stirred the pot a few times and walked into the living room where he and my great grandpa talked a bit more about whatever. A few minutes later, and great grandpa says, "Hey, great grandma, I think them beans and cornbread are done. Why not get a bowl?" My great grandma got up and went to the kitchen, cutting a big slice of cornbread and putting it down on a fresh bowl of beans, and placed the bowl in front of the man. The man said, "Well, thank you very much, but I'm not actually that hungry. You all go ahead and have a bowl, and I'll just wait till I get home." And it was at this point that my great-grandpa pulls out from under the table that they were sitting next to a Colt revolver and simply said, "Them beans are especially for you. Now, you're going to eat them beans, aren't you?" And the man turned white. So, what did he do? Well, the man ate the whole bowl, and my great-grandpa then, a little after seeing him finish the bowl, told him to leave. By the time that he walked out that door, he was sweating and pretty much looked dead already, and went to stand up and fell over, dead on the floor. My great-grandpa took the man's body and loaded it into the truck and took it to town to the local sheriff and told him that my great-aunt came into the living room and told my great-grandpa she had seen the man putting something into the beans and stir it in. Great-grandpa knew that something was wrong immediately and was ready. But the doctor said that it was arsenic poisoning. Not long after that, 3 of the 18 kids that they had got really sick too, and they died from the flu. They buried their kids and didn't want anyone else of their family to die, so they left to southern Oklahoma, where they lived out the rest of their lives. My grandpa died in 1998, and we buried his ashes under the same pear tree where my great-grandmother gave birth to him. The house was burned down before they left to make sure that the disease was dead. There's little left of the site, but sometimes when I go there and see it, I always thank God that my great-grandpa was a smart enough man to know when danger was near and save my life in the process. This happened today, and it really messed with me. I've been thinking about it all day and all evening. So I took my 5-year-old son and a 3-month-old daughter to the playground today to meet a friend and her daughter. It's got regular playground equipment, a huge parking lot, and a big grassy area and trees around the play area. On the other side of the trees is some sort of development thing that they're working on. The area that this school is in is pretty rural. It's just a bunch of twisty roads and random buildings. I've never really thought about or noticed this until today as well. We get to the park and meet up with my friend. Another mum that we know is there with 2 girls too, and the only other people there is a dad with a little girl and a boy that look to be somewhere between 10 and 12, I'd say. So the mums are all sitting, just chatting, playing with my adorable daughter, having a good time. The kids are playing together, everything is good. Eventually all the kids from our group kinda wander off through the playground doing their own thing. The seesaws are in the shady area. Next to them is a big stretch of grass. Then the trees with the semi-developed area are behind that. My son wants to seesaw, but nobody wants to do it with him, so I get up to go and help him, and the 10-ish-year-old boy comes over and says, "Hi, do you want me to play with him?" Which was a little strange that he asked me and not my son, but I said, "Sure, bud, go ahead." So he gets on the other side and starts seesawing with him, and his demeanor was just so strange. He didn't smile, his voice was completely flat. He didn't say a word to my son, he just seesawed with him. My son was oblivious and chatting away at him, and after a few minutes I started walking back to my bench and I hear the boy start talking with my son. Okay, so maybe he's just shy around grown-ups. I sit down and start talking to my friends, and the dad walks near us to probably go up to his car, and I say, "Hey, it was really sweet of your son to offer to play with mine," and smile at him. He then looks at me and goes, "He's not my son. I don't know who he is. He walked over and asked if I wanted him to play with my daughter, and then just kind of followed us around until you guys got here." He sort of laughed like, "Weird, right?" and then just shook his head. I got a very uneasy feeling in my stomach and looked over to the seesaws, and when I did, they were gone. I jumped up, handed my daughter to my friend, and run into that direction yelling my son's name. I see them walking, almost to the trees. The trees are not close. I'd guess a football field or so away from the play area. And when I see them, I get this awful feeling and run as fast as I could yelling my son's name. He turned around and started trying to walk to me, and the little boy grabs his arm and tries to pull him toward the trees. He gets upset and starts saying, "Hey, let go of me." Now, usually, this is not a quality about my son that brings me anything but trouble, but he does not like to be grabbed, pushed, or pulled, and he has ADHD, so when he gets frustrated, it usually comes out in aggressive ways. And boy, was I so thankful for this today. He starts punching the boy and headbutting him like a little crazy person, and the boy lets go as I get to them and runs to the trees. My friends are finally realizing that something is going on, so they're standing at the edge of the play area looking confused. My son is crying, I'm shaking, I don't know what the hell just happened. I asked my son where he was going, and he said that his friend wanted to take him to see Ryan, from Ryan Toy Reviews. It's his favorite YouTube channel, and he talks about it non-stop. He told the boy about Ryan, and apparently the boy told him that he knew where Ryan lived, and did my son want to go and visit him and play? So, of course, my son said yes. I don't know what the intention was, but it was a kid. I don't understand why he would lie to my son, and why he wanted him to go into the woods, why he was just so weird. Maybe he was innocent, but I don't think it was. I'm an older teen from Cathedral City, Cali. I don't imagine that there'd be any other Redditors here with the same experience, but I'd like to put it out there. I'm a former, as of this incident anyway, street artist. I'd rather not dwell on the details of this subject since I'm no longer involved, so I'll just try and get to the story. So all of this took place late last year and involves me and my friends. After racking paint from a local supermarket, me and my friend Devon headed down a long road that split a couple of miles down the city to the highway. Just before the turnoff to the highway is a car mall, and beside that car mall is a wash. Assuming that some of you aren't from Cali, a wash is a big drain system that's several feet wide and tall to suck up water and push it down the sewer or wherever the hell it goes. This is a necessity since during the winter and the fall months, all of the rainwater comes directly to us from the right beside the mountains. There's even a dam just beside this wash too. To get back to the story though, we drove down to the strip club, which is just down that same street, to park Devon's car. This place is open almost all night since, well, it's a strip club. We got out and walked from here to the wash, a short walk, and we didn't have to jump the fence with the no trespassing sign since homeless people had already made their own makeshift entrance. We slid down the side of the sloping wash on our jeans with plenty of patches. This had not been our first time in the wash system. This part of the wash system was right beside the dam and had perfect real estate for tagging and piecing. After we finished what we came for, which didn't take too long, Devon told me that we should go inside the tunnel section so that we can get more spots. I didn't think much of it, since most of my concerns are related to the police and not the paranormal. So we head inside and move in deep, surprised with just how long it is. Devon finally sets down his backpack and takes out his spray cans, and it was just at this moment that we heard something. Something so loud that it practically shook the whole ground. Being in southern Cali, we thought it was just an earthquake and began to pack up our things before even getting started, just in case anything caved in or whatever. But that was when we turned around and saw what we saw. The roof of the cement pipe that we travelled through was about 9 to 10 feet tall, and what we saw was crouching just to move inside of it. It was a man who was butt naked, pale as anything, and wearing a terrible dollar store Halloween mask. I didn't have the capability within my own mental integrity to scream or say anything. Where we were positioned was a long winding turn, and we couldn't tell if he was looking at us or not. I covered my mouth, though, and backed up the other way, eager. Devon backed up along with me slowly and quietly till we could no longer see him. He turned to me and whispered that he was going to get his phone out and take a picture. I told him that what we needed to do was get the hell out of here. We talked fast and frantically, asking each other if it was related to the earthquake, and settled on the fact that it most likely wasn't. I could hear a deep breathing coming from down the tunnel before we just began speed walking at a quiet pace, hoping to flee from this giant dude wearing a creepy bat, albeit cheap, looking mask. We ended up coming out of the other exit, passing a couple of sleeping bags on the floor that most likely belonged to a homeless person. I began to become lightheaded, most likely from the shock or just being so freaked the hell out. Once we saw the exit, though, we just began to run. Pushing over the sand and onto the empty basin beside the dam, we walked up and over the side of the dam's basin until we found ourselves on the highway that I mentioned before. We crossed without much worry since it was super late and nobody was on the road. Nothing else happened that night, and nothing else nearly as strange has happened to me ever since then. I'm not really the type of guy to get super involved in ghosts or whatever that was, other than listening to the occasional scary story, but this has made me start thinking more about things that I just can't explain. I thought I'd share it with you guys to see what you think, but if you live in the area and have experienced anything similar, please comment or at least to let me know. I'm trying my best to find anyone who knows anything about this, so if you're a paranormal investigator or someone who just kind of understands things like this and is able to debunk it as some kind of trick that others may have played on me and my friend, please do shed some light. I'm kind of looking for any excuse to think of this as anything other than what it appeared to me as. Also, I'm really sorry for poor storytelling skills. I don't get a lot of this type of thing going on, and I'm not the wordy type. But I felt as if others should know just in case anyone relates or can help me out with understanding what this was. Thanks for listening, and all the names are fake to protect my friends too. I was 18 years old and on my way home to California on summer break after my sophomore year of college. I had a 9-hour car ride ahead of me and stocked up on energy drinks, soda, and snacks for the ride home. I left school late after dinner with friends and planned on driving into the night. I'm making good time, and I'm around 3 or so hours from home, which was Yuba City at the time. I'm an hour outside of Reno and on a lonely stretch of road when it happened. I suddenly get the urge to pee. Those energy drinks I chugged are coming back to haunt me, and I kick myself in the butt for not stopping when I had gassed up 45 minutes before. But I saw a sign that advertised a rest stop coming up, and so I drove the few miles to the sign and then pulled in. Parked in the parking lot was a ratchet-looking sedan, and on the other side of the lot, a Sprinter-type van. I quickly got out and hurriedly jogged to the restroom before I peed myself. I was flushing when I heard someone enter and I froze. Now, I'm in decent physical shape and I work out quite often, but for a guy, I'm on the smaller side. I'm only 5'7" and I'm about 160 pounds. So I'm bracing myself for Michael Myers type crap when I open the door and see an average Joe looking guy, and he looked up and gave me a friendly smile and then stepped over to the urinal. I washed my hands and was getting ready to leave when he starts talking. His voice was gravelly and low, so I couldn't hear him the first time. "Hey, you like dogs, man?" he asked as he washed his hands. He was wearing those coverall mechanics wear, and he had grease stains on it. My creepometer started beeping. I shot him a friendly smile and said to him as I left the bathroom, "Yeah, man, dogs are cool." And well, that was the wrong thing to say, because he comes following me out the door almost on my heels. "Hey, I got a new puppy. Want to see him? He's real cute." And now I'm freaking out. The keys are in my hand and my cell phone is in the other. I called back to him in a shaky voice. No thanks, I gotta get going, okay?" I'm getting into the car when he grabs the door trying to open it wider, and the dude was strong, and he's a good few inches smaller than me too. I start my car and put my phone to my ear, and what he said next caused me to almost crap my pants. "Time the cops get here, you'll already be dead." And with that, I kicked at his stomach, and thank goodness it connected. He let go of the door and fell on his butt. I then locked the doors and screeched the hell out of the rest stop. I saw him scramble for his car, but I didn't stay around to watch. I took off like a bat out of hell. I was a nervous wreck for the next 3 hours, thinking that he was going to follow me home and finish me off. When I got home, I told my dad, who had stayed up to wait for me, what happened, but he talked me out of calling the authorities. I made sure to take an entire different route when I went back to school in the fall, and because of that, I've never stopped at another rest stop ever again. And I don't intend to anymore. I was 8 years old at the time, and I woke up to a loud noise that came from the wardrobe. The noise was like someone hit his head against it or slammed it really hard. I freaked out and turned the lights on to check what was going on, and there was nothing. My brother, who is 3 years younger than me, and I were sleeping in the same room, and the weird thing is that he didn't wake up to the sound that I heard. So I turned off the lights and went back to bed, thinking that I must have just been imagining things. I rolled to my right side facing my brother's bed, and I saw the weirdest thing that I've ever seen in my life, and it still haunts me to this day, 15 years later. It was a creature that I can only describe as looking like a gnome, standing on my brother's bed exactly behind him. My vision got clearer after my eyes got used to the dark. He was an arm's length tall and had the scariest grin on his face, and he kept looking at me and waving. But the strange thing is that he kept getting smaller in size with each second passing. He kept waving for a whole minute and getting smaller and smaller until he just disappeared. I know this sounds crazy, and I don't know if I was hallucinating or not that day, but since then I've just been scared of the dark. People sometimes laugh at me for that, but they didn't see what I saw. Last night, my wife and I made a typical trip to our local Walmart. Generally, we go between 1 and 3 a.m. I'm a bit of a night owl by nature and have a long-standing aversion to busy stores during the day. A long story involving a hold-up too. But our local Walmart, which is on the access road of a major interstate highway, is the newest in our area and generally considered safe. A few notes to start off with too. The particular area of Texas that my wife and I live in is commonly known for being an area frequented by sex traffickers. It's so bad that the city has put up billboards, since our county recently had a large prostitution bust involving women who were victims of trafficking, and Johns with occupations ranging from local pastors to deputy sheriff, elected officials on the city council, big business owners, and one of my clients that is now a former client, since he got himself involved with all of that. There's a particular area of our town that most know not to venture in at night, especially if you're a female. Ironically, or unironically I suppose, this bad area is adjacent to a large university. However, my wife and I lived in the suburbs on the south side of town, which is generally considered safe and is well patrolled by the local police department. We have 2 Walmarts in town, one in the bad area and a new one built in our suburb. The Walmart that we went to last night is the new one located a couple of miles from our house. Also, I should probably mention that my wife is 27, but looks around 19 or 20. She's an attorney that teaches deadly force, castle doctrine, and situational awareness, and handgun safety to women throughout our area. She's been involved in martial arts since she was 5, has a license to carry a handgun, and routinely carries a Sig Mark 25 in her purse. In short, she's well trained for detective dicey situations. So my wife drove our truck to Walmart, and I sat in the back working on correcting an issue with one of my mobile radios. I'm a ham radio operator. She parked in a well-lit area near the 24-hour entrance as usual. As typical for the hours that we go to Walmart, the parking lot was mostly empty, except for the employees who parked near the same entrance. As soon as my wife put the truck into park, a newer grey Kia SUV pulled in sideways. almost blocking my wife from driving forward any further. A woman in her late 20s, looking like she was under the influence of drugs or something, stared at my wife for a few seconds, got out of the SUV, ran over to the driver's side window, and started knocking on the window. My wife, being skeptical of any encounter like this, barely cracked the window to see what the woman wanted. "Hey, sorry to bother you, but I really need your help. That woman over there, she needs a jump, and I'm afraid to go by myself." She pointed to a dark area of the parking lot where a newer Honda Accord was parked with no lights on. My wife then said, "Sorry, but we don't have any jumper cables. But I'll call the police for you if you're afraid." No. I need your help. It'll be quick. I just need your help for a few minutes." "Does that man have jumper cables? How do you know him? I'm just trying to make sure that you're not going into a dangerous situation yourself." "Oh, he's got jumper cables, I'm sure. I just need your help, now, please." Apparently, the crazy woman didn't notice me in the back seat, so I figured that it was time to make my presence known. "Listen, lady, my wife told you we'll call the police for you. We'll be happy to wait here in this area until they get here. But for our safety and yours, please just go back to your car and wait, alright?" "No, I don't need a damn man involved. Women need to stick together. Come on, honey, I'm scared and need your help. I'd help you out if you were in this situation." "I'm not going anywhere with you. I don't know you, and I'm certainly not walking into a situation that I know sounds like a setup." "You don't understand. I just need you to make sure I'm safe while he jumps his car. I need you over there now. There's a man one row over that parked right around the same time as us. Why didn't you ask him for help?" She then begins shrieking, "I need your help." I called the police, let them know what was going on, and told them that we needed an officer ASAP. My wife rolled up the window, but the crazy woman kept standing around our truck, screaming and pointing for my wife to roll down the window again. Sick of this crap, and probably against my better judgment, I must admit, I got out of the truck and told this woman in a few colourful phrases where she could go if she didn't leave us alone. The crazy woman ran back to her SUV at this point, and sped off toward the dark, unlit area of the parking lot where the newer Honda Accord was parked. I got back into the truck and told my wife to lock the doors again and be ready to get the hell out of there if the man and the woman start heading our way. While we were waiting for the police, I observed the woman parked next to the Honda, roll down her window and start talking to the man. It was apparent that they were in a heated argument, but we were too far away to hear the contents of the conversation. At no point did either of them make an attempt to jumpstart the Honda, mind you. In fact, I never saw the man get out of the Honda. A couple of minutes later, a police officer showed up. I flagged him down, told him what happened, and pointed out to where the man and the woman were parked. And as soon as the first police officer started driving toward the dark area of the parking lot, the woman screeched the tires on her SUV and started hauling us toward the other entrance to the parking lot. Around the same time, the Honda that was supposedly dead just magically turned on. Fortunately, another police officer was turning at that entrance and was able to stop the woman. A third officer arrived shortly afterwards too. My wife and I went into the Walmart, did our shopping, and came out about 25 minutes later. When we got back to our truck, both the Kia and the Honda were getting towed by a tow company known to work with the local police department. I'm not sure what went down, but I assume that both the man and the woman were arrested. If the woman's behavior was any indication, she was heavily under the influence of drugs and likely had some either on her person or in the SUV. But later I asked my wife what she would have done if the crazy woman had approached her while we were walking and made an attempt to pull my wife towards the SUV, and her response was, I would have knocked the crap out of her. The location is Grant Park, commonly known as Seven Bridges. It's a well-known haunted forest located in Oak Creek, WI, near the lake that is open to the public. Upon entering, you reach a chilling sign that reads, "Enter this wild wood and view the haunts of nature." Urban legend has it that nobody has crossed all 7 bridges at night and made it back alive, hence the name 7 Bridges. There have been numerous reports of people doing all sorts of stuff here and even murder in these woods throughout the years. People have said that you can hear the screams of the victims from deep inside the woods, and the sounds of people falling and nooses stretching from tree branches. The first time I explored Grand Park was with a group of skeptical friends. I've never been a skeptic of the paranormal, so I knew what I was initially getting into, although I was not prepared. Once we arrived at the park, we parked the car and sat inside for a while talking about the stories that we'd heard about online, daring each other to cross all 7 bridges alone and make it back alive. It was about 2 a.m. at the time, and other than the car's headlights, it was abysmally dark. Eventually we built up the courage, though, to step outside and begin to enter the forest. We had forgot to grab flashlights, so we had no choice but to use the flashlights from our phones. We walked up to the entrance and read the sign that you're greeted with before entering. Enter this wild wood and view the haunts of nature. At this point, we were hesitant to walk any further, I must admit. We were all pretty spooked. We all reevaluated why we came here in the first place, but then we figured we're already here, so why not explore, right? Well, little did I know that this is when I'd eventually become traumatized from what I experienced. My thoughts began to race, and I just couldn't stop thinking about all the stories that I'd heard about this place. This was the first time that I'd visited a truly haunted paranormal location at night. We began walking further through the woods, making it past the initial entrance, though. It was dark, and it was quiet. All you could hear was the wind and the trees moving. The only source of light that I had was from my phone, and at this point, it began to feel like my mind was playing tricks on me. I grabbed firmly onto my friend's hand and told her to stay close to me. I kept envisioning vague flashing images in my head of people hanging from the tall trees and bridges. I told my friends to stop walking for a second. I started getting just emotionally distressed is the only way I can describe it from what I was experiencing in my head. Meanwhile, my friends seemed unfazed compared to me. But my eyes began to tear up uncontrollably, and all of a sudden I heard a girl scream loudly from deep inside the forest. It was a haunting, terrifying scream at which I completely freaked out and began to run towards the car, only to look backwards, my friends with faces of confusion. I knew what I heard, though. It was loud, it was clear, it echoed through the trees like a tree collapsing and hitting the ground. But my friends heard nothing at all. They were convinced that I was going crazy. They kept telling me that it was nothing, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But I knew exactly what I heard, and I couldn't explain it. I could hardly even speak. I refused to go back in that forest too. And that was my first and last time that I ever went there. To this day, my friends have no explanation as to why I heard that girl scream. They didn't hear anything. It's completely unexplainable from their point of view, and I never understood why or how that happened. I mean, we barely stepped foot into that forest, and I was instantly greeted with the haunting scream of a tormented girl. I'm wondering, too, if anybody has an explanation or idea as to why I heard that scream, but the 4 of my friends heard nothing. Still to this day, I can't figure it out. The only explanation I can think of is that maybe I actually heard something paranormal. But what do you guys think? So this happened to me about a month ago at one of my favorite pizza restaurants. For context, this restaurant is an upscale community and is a high-quality Italian pizza spot. Definitely not one of your hole-in-the-wall house of pizza joints. This place attracts businessmen and women in their lunch breaks, housewives and their children, and in this case, a modest father and son duo. So I was seated with my mother, grabbing some pizza on my lunch, something we try to do a few times a month to keep in touch. But across from us, about 6 feet away, there was a modest-looking father, working class, late 30s, with his son, probably around 8 years old. I couldn't help but notice that the entire time that we were sitting there, a very large and, excuse me, but gross man in his late 60s was continuously walking in between our tables and around the backside of the father and son's table. He was hard to miss, raggedy clothes, stood tall in stature, maybe 6'3", and had a very distinct and unpleasant aroma that he carried with him. I was alert just because of how out of place he seemed at this restaurant. I asked my mother if she noticed him, but she didn't. We continued to eat and chat about our lives, but not 10 minutes later I look up and there he is again, trudging his way through the restaurant towards my area, eyes focused intently on the dining neighbours. I can't say the father noticed anything, as he and his son were engaging in some standard 8-year-old to 40-year-old curious conversation, except that I know for a fact that the father noticed this man after what happened next. The large and unkept man makes his way to the father and the son's table and stops this time. My ears perk up and I'm alert. He puts his big dirty hand on the table and looks at the 8-year-old for a moment. The 8-year-old looks nervously at the father for a cue, and what the man says next freaked me out and was reason enough for the father to get up and leave. The man looks right at the father and says, "That's a good-looking boy you got there, sir," and immediately lifts his hand and fixes his gaze upon the child, stands up and walks to the bathroom. The father's face grimaces with confusion, anger, and a protective curiosity. The boy asks his father what happened and who that was. The father, not even looking at his son, just utters, "That man is very weird, son, and I think he's a bit of a creep." I try and I make contact with the father to reaffirm that I heard that too, but he was fixated on that bathroom door. Shortly after that moment, the father and the son left, and I never saw that large man again. My mother didn't even see this happen, and when I explained it to her, she kind of felt her skin crawl, and her and I theorized why he was in that bathroom for so long. And it was disgusting. When I was 17, I made a dodgy decision in quitting school. Mainly this was due to my parents, my mum and stepdad, moving from Elizabethtown to New Albany, which honestly infuriated me, and I found it selfish for many reasons. New Albany had always depressed me, but when I visited, I was fully creeped out, but also kind of fascinated, I must admit. Everything was rotting and industrial, or rotting and Victorian, and events would transpire that would cause my dad, a military-based chef, to become disabled and force me to move in with my mum and my new stepdad. I promptly got a job and began sleeping in an upstairs room. There were many strange and sometimes terrifying things that would happen in the time that I lived in that city too. But an incident that kind of marked the beginning, when I was still getting used to the city, happened one night before I was supposed to go to work. We lived in one of the many older houses that were long, a bit crammed together, with an alley behind the houses for trash and vehicle garage access. I remember how these alleys just stank of garbage in the summertime. But one of my sisters, Elizabeth, had complained several times of seeing shadows and hearing rushed footsteps in the street behind the house. We all only paid polite attention to her complaints, not taking it too seriously. But she was known for complaining a lot that she experienced paranormal incidents, and we assumed that this was just another one of them. We all kind of got annoyed because we were awakened several times during the night with her saying that she saw somebody lurking outside the fence or near the garage in the back alley. I had work the next day and was particularly irritated, ticking away the number of hours of sleep that I would get with each disturbance. Finally, I told her that I would sleep downstairs if it made her feel better. There were many windows in these old houses to let in the sun, so I reasoned that I would see the sentry light come on if somebody was lurking in any part of the yard on either side of the house. And well, I was wrong. I woke instead to a short series of bangs on the iron-wrought screen door, hard enough to rattle it and make the window shake. I got up, bleary and admittedly scared, but resigned to go look out the door's glass frame. My stepdad reached it before me. I was relieved because, well, he was an ex-Marine and scared of pretty much nothing, but I wanted to look brave around him, so I went to the door next to him. And a man stood in the doorway, shadowed due to the sentry light. He was somewhere in his 20s, I'd guess, had a neckbeard and a very haggard look despite wearing clothes that looked well kept. He was standing with a stillness that was honestly disturbing. Stepdad hollered a simple, "What?" at the man without actually opening the door. The man said nothing but raised his hand to his mouth, tilting an imaginary cup into his lips or something. We took this to mean that he wanted water and fetched him a glass quickly. He drank it without saying a word and then stood on the porch for several minutes until Stepdad just got impatient and said, "Man, it's 4 a.m. and we want to go to bed." The man's still face then broke into a pained grimace, so extreme that it was both comical and scary. In a horrible, deranged whine, too, he said, "I'm full of demons, and I ate my mum tonight." He then broke into a fit of just wheezing sobs. My stepdad said, "Listen, guy, you need to leave now, okay?" and slammed the door in the man's face. He called the cops as I watched the man walk into the middle of the road in front of the house and sit, arms over his knees. The cops came and talked to the man. They told us that he lived down the road and that everything was okay. But they told us really nothing other than that too, but that morning I checked the backyard and made sure the dogs were secure before I got ready for work. My sisters were also getting ready for school. As I was putting on my uniform, I heard one of my sisters scream. I ran to the kitchen where she was, which faced the backyard, and it was my older sister, Reno, and she pointed out and told me that she had watched the door leading into the garage open. And sure enough, it was open a head's width, after I'd just shut it and checked all the other doors and gates out back. The dogs were also going absolutely nuts, and it was just me and my sisters at this point, and the only weapon that I had was a cane sword that belonged to my grandfather. It was dull, but I still handed it to my sister, telling her that a good whack or a poke from it would still probably mess somebody up. She decided to follow me, maybe emboldened by the dog and our weapons. I opted to take its encasing, which was a hard piece of iron with a flared pommel where the blade fit in. We approached the garage, probably being stupid, and attempted to peer into the crack in the door. The lights inside were on, and we heard a loud bang from inside. I went forward, swinging the cane in as ruthless as a strike as I could muster, but only hitting the frame of the broken-down car inside. The door on the other side was open, and my dog took a chance to run out of it after the intruder. I looked behind me and saw the cane sword abandoned on the ground and guessed Reno had booked it back inside. After much searching, I found my dog terrorizing another dog behind a fence, and no sign of anybody the entire time I searched. We told our parents, but they just kind of dismissed everything. They said that I probably had forgotten to lock the door and it came open and that the mother eater wasn't really dangerous. They were more worried about the dog escaping and hurting somebody. We rarely ever actually saw the mother eater after that, and we stopped being scared and would laugh when he was brought up, joking about what he could have possibly meant by saying that he had eaten his mother. But our last encounter with him was years later. We found one day that he was walking up and down the road most of the day in July. When it got dark, me and Elizabeth were sitting up just watching fruit baskets when we heard a series of, really loud moans. I sniggered and she pulled a disgusted face. We thought our parents were getting it on or something, until my stepfather came stampeding down the stairs and the moans turned into screams that sounded like "no, no," just over and over again. Outside, there was a commotion of flashlights and many people, and we watched as two people came into our yard and seemed to be searching for something with flashlights. They ran back to the road as the police pulled up and gathered around the cop car. This incident was never explained to us, and the police just said that there was an incident, but we never heard of or saw the mother eater again after that, though plenty more definitely happened in New Albany, that's for sure. My hunch after all of this is that the guy attacked somebody at night when they were walking by or something. I don't know what he did to them, but maybe his whole spiel about eating his mother wasn't just a figment of his imagination. I'm an atheist and a really skeptical person. I've never believed in the paranormal things, and I'm starting with this because I know that it can be hard to believe what I'm about to share with you guys. Well, in summer of 2017, my aunt sent me a photo. She and her boyfriend found this abandoned small village in Burgos, Spain, but they went there because he liked to take photos and whatnot, and that was his hobby. When they arrived there, they couldn't do this special effect with the fire that he wanted to do because of the weather, I guess, so he just took some pictures of this abandoned church. And this is the photo that my aunt sent me. Now, I can assure you guys that the photo is definitely not fake. I thought it was at first, but they really had no way to fake it. My aunt was in the back of the camera. The light came from a flashlight the guy was holding, and there's just no way that the shadow was one of them, and they were alone there. I had no explanation for this photo, and no one I know had, so I believe that this was some kind of illusion. The best way to explain it to myself was to go there and try to recreate the photo, to analyze the place because I couldn't believe it. And so I went to Spain that summer. My aunt and her boyfriend took me to this place, the abandoned village, and here's my photo. The guy started taking photos too, but he stopped after like 15 minutes and told us that we had to leave. In the car, he was dead silent and his expression was just weird. Me and my aunt were joking about him seeing a ghost or something, and eventually he said something like, "I'll see you two laughing when you see the photos." We arrived home and the guy took his shirt off for some reason, and there was a really big scratch. Well, not really a scratch, it was more like a cut if I'm being honest, on his chest and another one on his back, the same size. That honestly shocked all of us because we couldn't find any explanation for it. I don't have any pictures of the scratch because he didn't want to let me take one, but I have the pictures that we took that day. There was nothing strange at first, but he was sure that there was something, so I guess that he saw something there and thought that he saw it on the camera. And later on, he told us that he saw some woman dressed in white with her hair covering her face coming really close to him, and he felt his chest freezing or something like that. To be honest with you guys, I don't really believe that part because he just described the ghost in the movie The Ring, but I thought a lot about that and realized that a lot of people who have seen things like that, including my grandfather when the movie didn't even exist, describe something similar, a woman with her hair covering her face. And so, I don't really know what to think about this. After I got home, I told this story to everyone. My friend asked to see the photos that we took that day and observed something weird. Here are some of the photos that we took in order, seconds after seconds, and if you look at the missing brick in the building, you'll notice that in some of the photos, it's not missing. The reason could be the light, but I really don't think so. Small towns can just have some outright creepy stuff go down in them. I have 3 stories of my own experiences while in a small town surrounded by open plains and dense wilderness. I'll share the others in the near future if this one picks up. Although I can't really prove all of it, I hope that you'll understand that my 3 stories are very much real and, while not dramatic, still hold a lasting effect on me. So, I used to work retail for a sports company that also sold hunting equipment. We always kept the guns, the knives, the hatchets, and the machetes locked away. However, a customer is allowed to check them over before deciding to purchase it. In order to unlock the guns, we need to be certified, but with the knives, you just need to borrow the key from the manager on duty. It was near our closing time, and I was cleaning behind the counter when 2 people came in. I heard the cashier welcome them, and they came straight to me. They were both sketchy looking, I must admit. My small town has an issue with drug addicts, and these 2 definitely looked the part. They were thin, had heavy shadows around their sunken eyes. They were twitchy and wore nasty clothes that just kind of hung off of them. They were also covered in tattoos, which isn't a problem, but I noticed the lady had the most nasty looking lightning bolt on one of her cheeks, and I figured that it was probably a cover-up. But they took a great interest in the large knives and wanted to look over each one. The guy was telling me about how their houses recently got raided by the police and that they stole their knife collection and wanted to rebuild it. I suggested that they took them because there's a legal limit to the size of knives without a license. He shook his head and told me that none of them would be on the legal limit. And after several minutes, the guy just suddenly says their bus is waiting on them, even though he never checked a watch and there's no clocks in the store. And the two just leave, and we were able to close. That night I get home and I'm telling my wife the same story. After looking at my phone and switching it to Facebook, I see an article pop up. The article was dated to just a few hours ago and had a picture of that same lady with the lightning bolt tattoo. And the article talked about how she stabbed her husband or boyfriend, I can't remember, after an argument. I didn't read the whole article then, but I do believe that she killed him, and it honestly freaked me out that I very nearly sold them a potential murder weapon. Growing up among the rolling green hills of Vermont meant that I spent a lot of time outdoors. Even though I lived in a capital city, my choice of activities had always been camping and hiking and swimming. Most of my outdoor memories are pretty happy, but there was one experience that I had that made me almost never go camping again. So my cousin Corey and I were on a summer vacation from high school, and we begged my mum to take us to our favorite campground for a few days. The next afternoon, we arrived at Lake Elmore State Park, where a ranger gave us a map with available sites circled on it, and after checking them all out, we settled on a lean-to called Ash. All of the lean-to sites at this park are named after trees, with ash and juniper always being our preferences since they were a little more private than some of the other sites. My family had been going to Lake Elmore since before I was born pretty much, and my mum and I both knew the grounds very well. Our first night was uneventful, since it was the middle of the week and the park was almost deserted, which meant that Corey and I never had to wait for paddle boats to become available, and we got Prime Lake beach boats without having to get there early in the morning. Honestly, the trip was pretty perfect. That is, until the second night. My mum wanted to go home on the second day to check on my brother Nate, who hadn't wanted to come with us, so after dinner she left. We knew that she wouldn't be back until around midnight, so we entertained ourselves by making s'mores and playing card games. After a while, we got restless and decided to walk down to the lake. From the bulk of the sites, the lake is about a 10-minute walk, I think, and Mount Elmore, which looms over the lake, is always beautiful at sunset. We made it down to the lakeshore just fine, and we enjoyed the cool sensation of wet sand squishing between our toes as we built a sandcastle. The sun was beginning to set in earnest, and we hadn't brought any light down with us, so we headed back to the site to grab one. I was ready to head back to the lake, but Corey suggested that we walk the trail that goes to the old fire tower at the top of Mount Elmore instead. I agreed, and we made our way to the outskirts of the campground where the trail started. An hour or so went by as we walked and talked, just enjoying the refreshing night air. The lantern gave us enough light that we didn't feel nervous, and we just made sure not to go off trail. There was only one path for most of the trek, so it was pretty easy to follow anyway. At one point, a herd of deer came bounding out of the woods near us, their appearance so sudden that I nearly dropped the lantern. Corey, now a bit spooked, asked if we would head back to camp. I wasn't really ready to, but I wanted him to be comfortable, so I agreed. We'd been walking for about 5 minutes when we heard someone in the woods off to our right. It was clearly a person, since their rhythmic footsteps clearly didn't sound like an animal. It wasn't unusual for rangers to patrol the trails even at night, and if one of them had seen us, they were probably checking to make sure that we weren't doing anything illegal or destructive. We waited for them to appear, but the steps had stopped and no one entered the circle of light that we were in. After a minute, Corey called out a tentative, hello? His voice quivering slightly. I thought it was a little odd that we couldn't see a flashlight by then, but I shrugged it off and just kept walking. If some weirdo wanted to be creeping around in the woods at 10 p.m. without a light, then that was their business, not mine. It was probably someone just sneaking away from their family to smoke or drink or something, which could easily explain why they weren't coming forward or greeting us. As we walked, I noticed that since the appearance of the deer, the woods had seemed oddly silent. I can admit, too, that by then, I was glad that we were heading back to camp. We were about halfway down the trail when a voice called out to us, which we instantly knew was my mum's. The sound had come from behind us, though, and Corey and I spun around in unison. I shouted out a greeting, but we didn't get a response. Corey looked at me, concern clearly on his face. It made sense that it had been my mum in the woods, probably trying to get us back for all the pranks that we'd pulled over the years, but it was weird that she suddenly just wasn't responding after just having called to us. We waited for several minutes, occasionally calling out to her. I started to get mad because by then her little prank just wasn't funny anymore and I was becoming unnerved. A few minutes went by and I was finally fed up, so I grabbed Corey by the elbow and began to march back to camp, grumbling about annoying mothers and stupid pranks. Corey hadn't said a word, but I noticed him watching the woods around us carefully. As we reached the last 10-minute stretch of the trail, my mother's voice once again rang out behind us. It sounded strange, though, and I immediately thought that she might be hurt. I spun around, swinging the lantern, casting distorted shadows. I couldn't see anything but trees, and I didn't hear anyone moving around. And at this point, I was slowly becoming scared, and I just wanted to get back to the safety of the campfire. But my attention was drawn to the lantern light reflecting off of something in a bush nearby. It was a pair of green eyes, but to my confusion, they were about 8 feet off the ground. No animal around here could be standing that tall, even on the back legs. So I said, "Yo, what the hell is that, dude?" Corey echoed my confusion, and we were both just staring at this towering shadow that neither of us dared to move around. And after a moment, it stepped towards us, and our feeble hope that it was just a deer on its back legs was smashed. To this day, we still don't know exactly what we saw, but the word goatman is the best way that I have of describing it. A pair of woolly legs and a fuzzy abdomen gave way to smooth humanoid chest and arms. The face was horrifying, a mix of goat and man that I still can't get out of my brain. I watched as it opened its mouth, my mother's voice giving a cheery-sounding hello coming out of the creature, but it was warped and too deep. "Hi, baby girl. Good morning, Lonnie." To this day, I don't remember getting back to the campsite. All I remember is screaming and running as fast as I could away from the creature, but that's it. I don't know if it followed us or tried to communicate further, and I'm not sure that I want to know, to be honest. We never did tell my mum or the park rangers about our encounter. We figured that they would tell us that we were just crazy or chalk our experience up to the use of recreational substances, so it just honestly wasn't worth the hassle. Corey and I have both returned to Elmore since then, but neither of us have ever seen anything like that again. I often wondered, though, if we just imagined the whole thing, or if it was just some sort of weird dream. But people just don't usually share the exact same dream, right? My mother had recently gotten proposed to by her boyfriend Dan. Dan is a 6-foot-tall man. My mother was around 5'4", and me, being the shortest female in the family, just came short of 5'2". Keep in mind that I am not very built either. So Dan and my mum have always wanted an outdoor wedding in the forest in northern Arizona. They'd set aside a weekend where they would go look at a campground and places to have the wedding take place. But they invited me to go with them on this trip to help pick out some spots, and without hesitation, I agreed because I loved going up north. So we packed up the car with all the camping stuff and we took off. My mum had told me that I'd be sleeping in my own tent, and she was giving me a gun because it was bear season. Dan and I looked at each other and kind of laughed, knowing that we wouldn't see anything like a bear, but more likely a mountain lion. But even then, it was pretty far-fetched to see anything. It was a long drive since we lived in the middle of Phoenix, but I didn't mind since I had a lot of games on my phone and food to snack on the way up. After a few disappointing locations, we finally found the perfect spot though on a mountain just after the ghost town named Jerome. It's well known for its haunted hotels and creepy vibes. I'm big into ghosts and would love to sleep in the hotels one weekend, but that's not the point of this story, so we'll leave that for another day. So we set up camp and did a bit of hiking until sundown, about 6:30 to be exact. We began to head back as I stopped dead in my tracks though, because I could smell something rotting as if something was killed and left to rot on the side of the trail. Dan looked at me and asked if I was okay. I looked up at him and nodded, and we continued back at this point. As we walked, the smell got stronger though, so I built up the confidence and asked, "Hey, do you guys smell that?" Dan looked at my mum and then me and said, yeah, it could be an animal that could have died, and we just haven't noticed it before." Oddly, he seemed confident but hesitant in his response to me. I nodded, and we continued though up the trail. After a while though, the smell faded and we got to the campsite where we ate and talked till about 9 o'clock at night. Since I didn't have any charge on my phone to stay up longer, I fell asleep shortly after crawling under my sleeping bags and blankets. But I slowly woke up to the same smell from the trail, but this time stronger, as if whatever was rotting was laying in the tent with me. Covering my nose with my blanket, I grabbed my phone for the flashlight, but I quickly remembered that it was dead. So I sat up, frustrated, and went to unzip my tent to get a flashlight from the car, but was stopped in my tracks. I could hear something just outside of my tent, walking around. Being a bit shaken by the sudden noise outside of my tent, I tried to reason with myself that it was probably just a small animal like a rabbit or something wandering around for food. But this was something much heavier. Remembering what my mum said about bears, I reached for the gun that was in my tent, only to realize that I forgot it in the damn car. As my anxiety began to build and the rotting odor began to grow, I softly called out for my mum, hoping that she could hear me. But there was no response. I tried a few more times before giving up because I was only getting silence in response. I tried being quiet as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and that was when I finally saw it. Something tall was standing on its hind legs just outside of my tent. And my first thought was, oh my goodness, there's a bear outside of my tent. But as my eyes adjusted more and more, the moonlight began to get brighter, and I could see that it was just way too skinny to be a bear. It was really slim and tall and surprisingly quiet too. As I've said before, I'm a 5'2" female, and this thing just towered over me. I was scrambling my brain trying to think of what this thing was when it finally hit me. My friend would tell me stories about the wendigo and how it smelled like rotting flesh and that it was really tall. And although I couldn't see this thing completely, that was what came to mind. I began to fear for my life as I could see this thing just standing there. I tried to hush my breathing and not to move to alert this thing that was just standing there. And as I sat there, the worst thoughts went through my mind that this thing knows where I am and it was going to eat me or something. As my mind was racing, it took 2 steps in the other direction, or what seemed like the other direction, to turn its head to my tent. But the only thing going through my brain was, oh crap, and it felt like an eternity that this thing just stared in my direction before it slowly went back the way it came. I waited for about 20 minutes before I slowly began to breathe like normal again and plopped back onto my blankets. Obviously, I didn't sleep that night, and when daybreak came, I told my mum and dad straight away what happened. But, of course, they brushed it off and said it was nothing. We did pack our things and took off after that, and as we were getting back into the car, the rotting flesh smell came back really strong. The panic shot through my veins again, and as we drove off with me at the edge of my seat, my mum turned to Dan and said, "Yeah, that smell was definitely a deal breaker. I guess we'll just have to find another spot, hey?" I sighed in relief that I'll never be going back there again to encounter that thing. Or, heaven forbid, have anyone from the wedding have that happen to them. I've been a cop since I was 22 years old. I graduated at the top of my class and I aced all of my exams. As soon as the last sergeant had shaken my hand at graduation, I had a job offer, and I eagerly agreed to fly across the country just so that I could be seen as a dependable person. Even so, nothing that they could have taught me in training would have prepared me for the horror that can stem from living in Vermont. If the freezing temperatures or black bears don't kill you, then there's still plenty of other things that will. When I first agreed to take the job as an assistant trainee at the state police barracks in Newport, I thought that it would be all pretty green mountains and delicious maple syrup, but boy, was I wrong. I originally hail from Anaheim, California, and I'm convinced that this frigid wasteland will be the death of me. I've always considered myself a tough chick, but I know now that I'm woefully unequipped to handle the things that lurk out there. And the call that started my living nightmare should have been a standard domestic abuse case, but instead, it ruined my entire perception of reality. In the 3.5 years that I've been here for, I've seen humans and animals frozen to death, lumberjacks squished to death by fallen trees, cars that were totaled after running into a gigantic moose, and timber rattlesnakes that are as mean as any diamondback. I thought that those were bad enough encounters, but I wasn't prepared to find myself in a situation that I was utterly unprepared for. I had daydreamed about how to get out of tons of different tricky, life-threatening scenarios before, but never had I envisioned myself in one that I straight up couldn't figure out how to handle. I didn't have any paperwork to do last Saturday, and since I'm field-trained, I asked my friend Officer T if I could ride with him on a domestic abuse call that had just come in. His partner had already gone home for the night, so he readily agreed to take me along as backup. As we threw on our jackets and headed out to the snow-dusted patrol cruiser, I felt a flutter of excitement, I must admit. I hadn't gone out in the field in a few months, and I'd been itching for some action now that most recent classes had graduated. I looked over the notes, ingraining into my mind that we needed to speak with a Mr. B, who was the suspected wife-beater. Officer T and I drove for about 15 minutes, eventually finding ourselves on one of those pothole-covered roads that Vermont is famous for. The snow was up to our thighs, and even our tactical SUV was having some trouble getting up a few of the icier hills. But we cursed our luck at being sent to a residence out in the countryside, especially since it was about 7 p.m. and it was pitch black out. A concerned neighbor had called us, and when we got to Mrs. F's house to hear her report, the distressed woman told us that there were strange screams coming from the creek area behind the houses. We had been under the impression that the fighting had been occurring inside her neighbor's house, and she said that it had until about 10 minutes before our arrival. She led us out to her back porch, and sure enough, after stepping through the doorway, we heard the screams. But they were very hard to describe, I must admit, and they sounded like a low-pitched version of a frantic woman yelling. Each scream lasted for about 3 to 10 seconds, though it never sounded like it was actually saying words. It was a cry of just sheer terror stuck on an infinite loop, and my adrenaline was pumping so hard that I didn't even want to bother knocking on Mr. B's door. A normal protocol dictates that we go next door and question the suspect, but under circumstances where someone is clearly in trouble, we're allowed to prioritize the public's safety over standard inquiries. So we sprinted from the front porch, making our way as quickly but carefully as we could towards the sound. Officer T and I heard 2 more screams, which were getting louder as we approached the creek. We were both getting a little unnerved, and as we made our way into the woods, we quietly discussed if it could be an animal. The screams of a mountain lion can sound just like those of a distressed woman at times, and our little flashlights weren't doing much to illuminate the shadow-filled forest. We were finally approaching the creek bed, though, and we hadn't heard a scream for about 5 minutes now. We had begun calling out for somebody to come forward if they were there, or to help lead us to them, but there was no more sound. I began checking for footprints, though, and there were only ours and something that looked vaguely deer-like. The powdered snow that we were kicking up was causing a fine sheen of mist-like coverage, but even so, we did a thorough sweep of the area and hadn't seen any signs of blood trail or struggle or anything. Officer T and I were just about to turn back and head for the car when the air around us just erupted into a cacophony of shouting, screaming, and savage howling. We were both startled, and I could see my confusion echoed in his face. I opened my mouth to make sure that he was experiencing the same crazy phenomena that I was, and then we heard an exact copy of the scream from where we were on the porch. It came from directly behind us, but there was nothing there but an open clearing. Officer T resolutely marched into the woods on the opposite side of the clearing to investigate, and then there was another chunk of silence for several minutes. I didn't even hear footsteps crunch, and I was starting to get anxious. About 10 minutes later, he emerged from a different direction, and for a split second, I thought that I saw his eyes shine red in the beam from my flashlight. I dismissed the thought, though, knowing that the glint of the snow off the light was playing tricks on me. Officer T beckoned me over, but I told him that we needed to get out of here. He looked almost angry for a moment. Then he crossed the clearing with me. I watched with unease as he plowed awkwardly through the snow, stumbling like he'd been drinking. I was about to ask what was wrong with him when an odd cry came from our right, and I nearly screamed out loud at this one. And that was the last straw for me. I grabbed Officer T's arm and all but dragged him back through the snow, keeping a firm grip on his biceps so that he couldn't fall or stumble again. I was 60 pounds lighter than him, but my adrenaline was pumping so strongly that I was able to get through the snow and up the hill like it was nothing. And just as we got halfway up to the house, the scream came again. It was so loud this time that it seemed to be right next to me, so I frantically shone my flashlight around, but there was nothing. In that glacial Vermont forest, there was no glinting of animal eyes, no rustling of bushes, no sound of footfalls, just tense silence. As I frantically traced our steps back to the house, a desperate wail sliced through the air, and it almost sounded like my name. It lasted for about 10 seconds straight, and it was much louder than before. By this time I was terrified, but I kept my wits about me enough to stop and tell Mrs. F to call us if anything else occurred. She never did call again, though, and I got us out of there as fast as the cruiser could go safely. I still don't know what was in those woods, but as an avid outdoors woman, I know no animals make those kinds of wails. One thing in particular, which still gives me shivers too, is how it was just completely silent between the screams. That may not seem that odd to you guys, but during the harsh winters in Vermont, there's still always some type of ambient sound when you're out in the forest. Even if it's just the lonesome cries of a crow or the wind causing bare branches to rub together, there's always something. That night, though, even back by Mrs. F's house, away from the source of the wailing, there was just absolutely no sound. And whenever I bring this up, Officer T just says the same cryptic sentence, and he tells me that I should be glad that I got out of there alive because the danger was closer than I knew. This happened about 15 years ago. At the time, I was dating around and I had a few creepy encounters during that time, but this guy takes the cake. He was an acquaintance that my brother had met at a bar a few times and was showing around the local area because he was new to the country. My brother set us up because he was apparently desperate for a girlfriend, and I guess I was pretty desperate too because we went on a date together. That date was probably the worst first date that I've ever been on as well. I showed up at the restaurant that we were meeting at. He was late, which isn't a huge deal, so I let it slip and we went to sit down. To be honest, I knew from the start that I wasn't really attracted to him, but I thought I would be polite and see if we had a nice night. He started off politely too. He held the door for me, pulled my seat out. It wasn't really necessary, but it was nice anyway. Then, when we were sitting down waiting for someone to come and take our orders, I was reading the menu and he started talking about how much his fiancée would have liked this place. That one definitely took me by surprise, and naturally I asked about his fiancée. He revealed that he had had a fiancée before moving over here, but he had just left her to move to another country. I asked why they had broken up, and he said that they'd never really broken up as such, but he got fed up of her nagging him about various things and just moved away. I really didn't know what to say after that, so I changed the subject and started asking him more about himself and where he used to live. He wasn't really very forthcoming, but eventually our waiter turned up and started talking to us. To clarify for the next part too, our waiter was a man of colour and he had an unusual accent for our area. So my date stares blankly at him for a while, then turns to me and says, "Do you understand this guy?" I said yes, I could understand him before telling him our orders, and after he left, my lovely date continued to shock me. He said, "Yeah, I wouldn't normally leave ordering to the lady, but the brown guy talked really weirdly and I just didn't get it." Wow, way to tell me that you're a racist and a sexist in one breath, dude. Again though, I was speechless for a few moments before I actually got angry with him. I don't remember exactly what I said. It was something along the lines of, well, I'm not a lady, so I can order for myself just fine, thanks. And why make racial remarks like that? And then he got annoyed with me and told me that he wasn't being racist. He just wasn't used to that kind of person where he was from. I pointed out that he wouldn't have met me if he just stuck to people that he was used to in his own country. He did calm down after that and told me that he wouldn't want that because he's glad that he met me. Honestly, too, I found that a little weird given that I didn't see any way to say that this date was going well and he didn't know me very well at all. But I decided that since we had ordered, I should stay, get my meal, and try to redeem the evening before I leave and never see this man ever again. So I answered some of his questions about me, basic getting to know me and small talk stuff for the most part, but then started on about my previous dates, if I was a virgin, whether I would be willing to wait until marriage and then be submissive to my husband or not. And it was at this point that I realized that I was most likely on a date with a religious bigot, hence the misogyny, weird attitude to sexual stuff, and all his other close-minded crap. So I settled for a none of your business, now I need to leave. I checked the prices on the menu, left my money for half of the food, plus a tip on the table, and I got up to leave. He said he didn't see why I was being unreasonable with him, as though this had been a normal date, but then he told me that I couldn't expect him to take my money because that was an insult to him. Fine, dude, you want to pay for a meal that's not getting eaten? You pay for it. I'm not that mad about spending my money that I'll stop you. So I took my money back and I just walked straight out. I just assumed that yes, it was an awful evening, but I wouldn't have to see him again. I wasn't even back to my house, though, when my brother started texting me, asking where I was because my date had called him in tears, saying that I'd gone off for no reason and he didn't know where I was or what to do. But thankfully, my brother was pretty calm about it and assumed that I had left for a reason. I explained everything to him and he was pretty surprised too. After that night, we both tried to cut contact, though. My brother stopped meeting up with the guy and we both blocked the Facebook account that we had for him too. But my brother also blocked his number because he would just not stop texting him, asking about me, alternating between being really worried about me to saying that he hoped that I dropped dead. Then he started making endless different accounts on social media to harass me. He told my brother that he didn't know why we weren't talking to him. He posted a bunch of just weird posts describing me in detail before going on to call me a lot of horrible names. We kept blocking them though and trying to move on. But then, the harassment got worse. He either found me and followed me at some point, or got my address from a friend and turned up one day, standing around outside my house, asking to come in and speak to me. When I refused to let him in, he grabbed my arm to prevent me from going in either and started to tell me that he didn't want to let me go because I would never find a man who would love me like he did, and that if I walked away from him again, that I would regret it one day when I was old and lonely. He went on and on like this for ages and ages while I tried to pull my arm away from him before I just got fed up of this and yelled at him to get off me and leave me alone, and then kicked him in the shin. He let go of my arm but cursed at me and said that I was being ungrateful to him, but I took my opportunity to run inside and I locked my door. He started banging on my door though, then trying to push it inwards. I was getting both upset by this man and just super fed up of his presence in my life, so at this point, I grabbed my phone and called the police, telling them that someone was trying to get into my house. I was told that someone would be there soon, but 20 to 30 minutes later, and there was no sign of them anywhere, and I was getting quite upset because this man was forcing my door open now, and I thought the lock was going to break soon, so I called my brother, who lives nearby, just because I knew that he would come, even though I wasn't sure if he would be able to help that much. But about 15 minutes later, my brother turns up, and after a brief conversation, I didn't quite hear outside, and the pressure was gone off of the door. I waited a few minutes and then texted my brother to see what was going on and if it would be alright to look outside now. But he didn't reply, and the next thing I heard was the police turning up. I went out to see what was going on. Apparently, after my initial call, they had received another call from a neighbor saying that there were two men fighting on my lawn. I guessed that this was my brother and the guy, since my brother looked out of breath and pretty shook up when the guy wasn't around anymore. My brother explained to the police that he had tried to stop the man getting into my house, and then the man had hit him. I told my side of the story, and some of the other neighbors were asked what they had seen and were able to tell them about his attempts to get in. Plus, there were marks on the outer side of the door where he had tried to repeatedly get in as well. And the police went to look for him, and a few weeks afterward I was called and told that they thought that they had found him, but when they wanted me to look at the suspect person, it wasn't the same man. I didn't hear anything else after that, and I really don't know what happened to him. I didn't see him again, and so I'm probably safe after 15 years. But regardless, I don't ever want to see that guy again. It was around 20 years ago when this happened. So, I grew up next to let's just say a very creepy 300 to 400 acre forested area in Middle TN, USA, for some location context. Apparently it used to belong to a family of freed slaves way back when, which is now still owned and undeveloped except for some really old dilapidated and decomposing structures, sporadically scattered across it from when it was occupied by the original family. My brothers and I used to go hiking into the woods and found these places, but we stopped because, well, that part comes later. For some clarity though, I mean an old farmhouse, a smokehouse, and on the border of the property line in the wooded area behind my old house was a really rickety old house. Think Little House on the Prairie or old Amish style, and you got the picture if you age it about 150 plus years. So, my old house, which was on kind of an elevation with the backyard sloping to the wooded property line bordering said creepy 300 acre wood, the neighborhood I was in was basically bordering the forest along this property line, along with the houses facing the street with the backyards bordering the forest line that was kind of hidden by a solid line of underbrush and very mature trees. So, with that out of the way, here's the memories that I have and why I'm here. Maybe someone can point me in the right direction, I don't know, but this is what happened. So keep in mind that in the forest, there are no roads and no inhabited houses, nothing built or done to this area because of a land division dispute and some will or deed problems with the family who owns the land, and apparently has been that way for 150 plus years. So it's pretty much just forest is what I'm getting at. My sister and I were out playing in our backyard near the property line where the creepy-ass falling down little prairie-looking house was when she spotted an old woman in the old dilapidated house behind the edge of the property line. The front of the house was broken down and you could see clearly into it, and it had 2 stories. It was kind of like a cutaway from a dollhouse where you can take off the front and see all the rooms. So this 70 to 80-year-old woman was just sitting on a green lawn chair watching us from the 2nd-story loft. Well, we were young, maybe 7 to 8 years old, so we didn't really notice some of the more peculiar aspects of this scene. We'd been playing for a few hours and would have seen someone walk by carrying a green lawn chair because we had a clear view of the old house and you couldn't really get to it unless you either came up from our yard or you hiked through a crapload of woods. And an elderly woman dragged a lawn chair up a rotted-out ladder to the 2nd story of a rotted-out loft and was just chilling and watching me and my sister? I don't think so. But of course, my sister goes and says hi. She finds out that she speaks and said that she used to live in that house a long time ago. She looked fairly normal for an old person, but the face was indistinct to me, like I couldn't really get a solid look at it for some reason. I got uncomfortable at this, and we said goodbye to the creepy old lady and left when I basically grabbed my sister and we went back to the house. Now, this all bothers me because no one has lived or been doing anything in this area of the forest for over 150 years, and no one could have or should have been living there. There's no records of it or anything. Also, I know for a fact that there was no roads or trails or anything going to that old house. Even now, thanks to Google Earth, I can confirm this. So then, how did this old woman just appear and disappear like she did? Because as we were walking back to the house, I glanced back at the property line about 80 yards back to the old house, and the green chair was there, but there was no old lady. She didn't pass by us, didn't hear her climb down, nothing. I had a clear line of sight, early afternoon, no overcast, and it was well lit. But she was just gone. I did some research from when I had to sell stuff door to door for school and whatnot. I couldn't find a similar person on my street, or even the next one over in the neighborhood. So, yeah, to this day I have no clue what happened that day. The second event happened maybe a few times to me in middle school, but sometimes when I was walking home from the bus stop at the end of the street, with the tree line and the underbrush along the backyards of the houses that bordered the creepy forest started to have like glowing red dots in sporadic clusters and resembled to me like tiny little orbs of red dull light that appeared along the underbrush and followed me home. I thought it was maybe berries, but no. I hiked through the area with my brothers, and there's no berries or pretty much red anything ever in there. Not holly or seasonal fruiting bushes or animals, because we had some squirrels, foxes, and deer, but that was about it. I couldn't explain it then, and I still can't now. I just remember running home whenever I saw the lights in the underbrush along the tree line appear and hide in my house as fast as I could. One time I was brave enough to go up to the bushes as well. The light just disappeared before I even got close. No sound, no wind, nothing but a kind of cold chill, I suppose. Which at the time was weird because it was late spring or early autumn when it happened to me, and it stays pretty dang warm usually. I could never find any evidence as to what it was though. No berries or critters or some wackadoo waving around red Christmas lights or anything. This memory still gets me a bit. And the third memory I have is I always felt like I was just being watched. So, my old house was, well, old, 30 years or so I suppose. Never really got the cold spots or other classic signs someone is making stuff up about having a paranormal encounter. But every now and then when I was alone in my old house, usually the basement or occasionally outside in the woods, I got the sensation that something or someone else was just there, and every time before I felt that sensation, I started to get afraid. A little first, but it would continue, and I'd be in a full mad dash away in full adrenaline mode whenever I realized what I was feeling. This happened more than I liked. I hated it, and I thought I was losing my mind, to be honest with you guys. Mind you, I didn't do any drugs, prescribed or otherwise. I didn't start drinking until college, and I just honestly couldn't explain it. And it didn't fit panic attack symptoms or anything like that. I've been checked out numerous times and looked at my medical records and couldn't find anything to explain it from a biological perspective. And it was just really weird. Anyway, I got a few more jarring memories, but these are the ones that I'll share for now because this has become pretty long. If I get any interest, I may post the rest and what eventually happened with everything that went down. But thanks for listening. This happened 12 years ago, but no one, literally no one except me, knows about it because I've always put science before anything else, religions, paranormal ideas, and so on, and neither I know if I can believe what I experienced or if it was all just a matter of the wrong perceptions. I'll share with you guys exactly how it happened though because, well, I'm afraid my feelings could distort my ability to write correctly. So it's late July and I'm going on vacation with Jane. Luckily, we live in a place, southeast coast of Italy, that literally has hundreds of choices. From country to sea, everything is great here and still not contaminated by the human touch. Not everything, at least. So we decide to rent a villa with direct access to the beach. We pack our things and drive to the place, and the villa is on 3 levels. The highest has a little parking spot with a space for 2 cars. The middle one has the house, and the lowest one has a garden with many vegetables and fruits ready to be harvested, and the gate to the beach. There's no beach, to be honest, though. Through the gate, you can directly access a cliff that slowly sinks into the sea. The entire property is surrounded by a series of tall trees and very high grass of some sort. They're the only things that divide the villa from the properties near it, too. So as soon as we arrive, I'm caught by the calmness of the place. A very gentle breeze moves leaves all around, and the near sound of the sea contributes to make everything kind of soft. But fast forwarding to the first mystery of the night, it's almost midnight and we're back from a disco. We open the front door and close it behind us. This is the moment too that I realize that the lock is damaged and the door can't be closed properly. Someone from the outside could easily enter the apartment, but I didn't pay attention to it when we arrived, so maybe it was damaged from the beginning. I promptly put a heavy table behind the door to block it, and then I go to sleep. After an entire day on the beach and a quick shower, it's already 10 p.m. and we're having a barbecue. Just me and Jane relaxing on the porch. While I'm taking care of the barbecue, I start hearing some rustling. And it's a normal thing to hear while being in the middle of a mini forest, but something just isn't quite normal about it. The rustle doesn't follow the wind, and a couple of times I swear to hear it even with no wind at all. So I start looking around. Maybe someone noticed 2 young people and decided to follow them. I'm starting to pay attention at the surroundings, trying to check out every spot with my eyes without saying anything to Jane because it'd be useless to warn her without a reason. And after maybe an hour or so, the encounter happens. So I'm in the garden taking 2 lemons and some tomatoes, and I clearly hear the rustling of dry leaves on the ground being stepped on. I slowly take some steps back without losing eyesight on the place that I believe the rustling is coming from. Jane calls me, and I turn my head to answer and turn back just to see what I'll never forget. The lower part of the body of something that was clearly moving from a bush to another and instantly freezed when I turned my eyes onto it. It's a skinny body with a very long leg, a humanoid in nature, and the other one is ahead of it, in the classic pose of someone who's walking. I obviously start panicking and decide that it's better to leave the house. The dinner was almost over anyway, so I take it as an excuse to go out and get some ice cream. A couple of hours later, after we're back, luckily enough it's the last day, and in the morning we have our breakfast and put our clothes on. But while putting my t-shirt on, I feel something weird on the back of my neck, something that I've never had before until this morning. Fast forward to a couple of months and many medical checkups after, and a clinic decides to open me up and take a portion of the tissue of the thing at the base of my neck and do a histological examination just to discover that it's a rare, and I mean really rare, type of cancer. Some sort of modification of an already rare female cancer. And I'm a young male, mind you. Today, after 12 years, I've just accepted that it's a part of my body now, even if I'm under continuous checkups and chemo. But the turn of events that led to discover this just all seemed too coincidental, considering too that this type of cancer takes decades to move or grow on its own, unless provoked by a huge physical shock like a muscle being literally torn apart or something. And I definitely didn't have any accident or the like before that morning. So Facebook memories reminded me today of something that I had chosen to forget. My wife was working for years at a vet tech at night on the weekends. Every Friday and Saturday night I would take care of my 2 kids by myself, and after they went down I would either play video games for a couple of hours or have some friends over for D&D. So 3 years ago I had gotten to bed late and was just setting down around 2:30 a.m. My wife usually got home at around 3:45 a.m. I'd say, but occasionally could get off a bit earlier too. So, we had video baby monitors at the time, as my daughter, 2, slept in a room across the hall from us, but my son, 4, was in the only other bedroom in the basement level. As I was laying there in the dark, I heard the sound of my wife talking to my son sweetly over the baby monitor. I reached over and turned on the screen and saw what looked like her with her back to the camera, talking to him, and him moving around on the floor and talking to her. I smiled, turned off the screen, and lay there silently waiting for my wife to come to bed. Maybe 5 or 10 minutes tops went by, and I didn't hear her talking to him anymore, but she just never came up. And it was at this point that I suddenly got a feeling of just dread. I picked up my phone and checked her location, and it was still at work. I immediately texted her and jumped out of bed to check the house and the kids. My daughter was sound asleep undisturbed. All doors and windows were shut and locked securely, and the alarm was armed. My son was awake though, which was odd since it was almost 3 o'clock in the morning now. I asked him if Mummy had been in his room, and he said no. I asked him who that was talking to him, and he said, I don't know, some kind of animal maybe. It was trying to play tricks on him. It was at this point that I took him to bed with me and left all the lights on until my wife got home, too scared to go back to sleep. After that, I completely forgot about it, as that was the only eerie thing to ever happen to me in that house until I saw it on my Facebook memories today. It still freaks me out a bit to think about it, and I hope to be able to put it out of my mind for at least another year now, because it was creepy as hell. So for some background, I know this is going to sound weird, but I know an entity who I called Spirit. He used to always be around me when I was a kid, which is when this story takes place. Spirit was my imaginary friend as a child, but he was different from any other imaginary friends that I had. I didn't need to think of any responses for him. He was completely opaque, and when I woke up at night, groggy as all hell, he'd always be asleep next to me. He was kind of like his own thing, more reality than imagination as a kid. I knew this too, and I suspected that he was something otherworldly, not a ghost, but like a guardian angel maybe. He was the only paranormal entity that I'd ever met, so you can imagine the excitement I felt at around age 8 when my friend told me about the Ouija board. I explained the Ouija board to Spirit and immediately said that I was going to make my own so that we could communicate in another way. Now, imagine your child asks you if you can play with Billy, and when you ask who is Billy, he says that Billy's the man in the white van who play wrestles with him. The face you'd make is the exact expression that Spirit made. He said, "But we're already talking right now. Why do we need that if we just talk just fine like this?" I basically said that I wanted to see him manipulate something in the real world for once, since he never moved anything around like a stereotypical paranormal person would. He argued that there was no need for him to do that. I stated adamantly, though, that it'd be fun to talk through the Ouija board. He grabbed me by the shoulders, looked at me in horror, and said verbatim, "Listen, if you use that board, that won't be me that you're talking to." And now I was scared half to death. I asked him, "What do you mean?" "It'll be something else, something darker." And to this day, I've never used one of those things. That conversation scared just the absolute crap out of me, and I'd advise that you too do the same. I've never had any bad paranormal encounters, but I don't think a Ouija board could ever give you a good experience. A harmless experience? Maybe, but I highly doubt that it's worth the risk. I've had multiple occurrences with the paranormal throughout my life, but I've had something evil following me for years now. I'll try to share all of these stories eventually because there's so many incidences, but here's my scariest one in the house that I'm currently in. So about 7 years ago, my best friend and I were in my room having a little sleepover as our usual weekends went, nothing different. And like I said, this obviously wasn't my first experience with anything paranormal, but it was my first time experiencing anything evil and really vicious like this. So it was around 2:30 in the morning, and we were listening to music and drawing when I noticed that my friend's bra was moving rapidly on my door handle. It was fall, so we didn't have the AC on, and we didn't have a heater on either. And my friend and I noticed at the same time, and as we look at each other in confusion, a giant gust of wind just filled the room. My friend ran into the bed as fast as she could, as she was originally sitting on the floor, and as she was running, something had pushed me into the wall, knocking the wind out of me. It felt like minutes of me choking and struggling before finally it let go, but the minute I felt whatever it was release, I got up and grabbed my friend who was frozen with fear, and we just ran as fast as we could out of the room and ran to my mum's bedroom. She, of course, didn't believe us and said that it was our imaginations and calmed us down, but while walking us back to the room, that's when we all noticed this awful smell of just rotting eggs. She was skeptical, but blessed my room with holy water after this. We had someone from the Vatican come over, and we all slept together in the living room for the rest of the night. The next morning, I woke up to my chest just hurting and aching. I pulled off my shirt in the shower and noticed giant bruises just all over my chest where I was pushed. And after that, I refused to sleep in my room for a month, and I refused to go in there without my mum, because it still terrifies me, even thinking about it. Let me start off by saying that I've had quite a few experiences with odd things happening when I was a kid, probably ranging from ages 12 to 6, I would guess, and I'll only be sharing the ones that I vividly remember. Note too that I just want to state that I've only told people close to me about these experiences, but figured that I'd finally ask about these things on something public due to recently seeing a shadow man again. I'd like to add too that my experiences that I list here aren't just involving shadow men, but other weird encounters too. So the first encounter that I could remember vividly was one day my parents and I were sitting on the couch watching television. This was sometime in the 90s, and I was about 12 years old, and it was daylight out, about 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. The couches were in a backwards L shape, and the television was in the corner of the room where the couches had the opening. We were all sitting on the couch on the bottom portion of the backwards L shape. There was a bookshelf behind the other couch, and it held things like books and little trinkets that my mum kept to display, ceramic stuff and pictures, stuff like that. And one particular photo was of myself as an infant, newly born at the hospital. It was of my mum holding me and my dad embracing my mum with all of us facing the camera. And this framed photo literally just pushed forward off the top shelf. And it wasn't like it fell forward. It was like something held it steady and straight for a few seconds and then just dropped it. But there were no animals that I could tell. We didn't own any indoor pets until a year or two later as well. And it honestly spooked us, and I remember my dad rushing over to it because of all the glass that shattered, while my mum went to find the broom and the dustpan in the kitchen closet. I was now on the couch closest to the shelf, standing on it and peering over, and when my dad picked up the photo, which was facing down at the time, there was a line of small dead bugs forming a line over my mum's wrists, like a bracelet, dried and stuck on the photo. But my dad showed it to my mum, and it creeped us all out pretty bad. I'd also like to note that we're firm believers of the paranormal things. The next encounter I had was in a house that my dad had gotten built. So it was a new house, and we'd been living there for about a year. And the rest of my experiences until recently have all taken place in this house as well. So one night I was home alone. My parents and I were surfers, but I had recently picked up skateboarding and didn't go with them much anymore and went with my friend skateboarding instead. I was on the computer in a chat room talking to friends. It was already nighttime. I don't remember the exact time, but it was dark out. So, the computer desk was located in the living room, but against the wall. To my right was a hallway that if you went down it, the right door was my bedroom and the left door was the bathroom. While I was on the computer, I had this just uneasy feeling like I was being watched, and sure enough, from the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow man peek out from the topside portion of the doorframe in the bathroom. Because I peeked out from the upper part of the doorframe, I always assumed that he was tall. But I stood up quickly, looked, and it was gone. I was spooked, I must admit, but I didn't feel too scared or that I was in any sort of danger or anything. The next encounter, though, was a few days after this. I fell asleep, and I don't know if this is real or just a dream, but again, I was home alone, sleeping on the couch in the living room. It was night outside from what I remember, and I woke up and stood up from the couch. I was going to go to the computer, and then got that weird feeling again. So, as I stood in front of the computer desk, I looked towards the bathroom door, and nothing was there. When I turned around, almost immediately, this hooded shadow figure was floating. I want to note as well that the first shadow man that I saw a few days prior to this event was not hooded, but it came from my parents' bedroom and flew really fast towards me. I was so scared that I fell backwards, and I remember it passing above me, and then it was just gone. And then I felt like I woke up, but was laying on the floor, but unlike the last encounter, I was legitimately frightened. Another encounter I had, I can't give an exact age or date, but I was already living in this house that I kept experiencing these things in. I had sleep paralysis, and again, I was sleeping on the same couch, and my dad was on the computer. I remember being in this sleep paralysis state, if that's what you call it, but it felt like someone was holding me down, like pushing me down into the couch. I looked towards the computer and saw my dad there, just browsing the internet. And then when I looked down to see what was holding me down, I saw 6 little demon kind of gargoyle-looking creatures. But the reason I say demons or gargoyles too is because they were all horned and had wings and were the colour of stone, I suppose. But they didn't feel like rock or stone. They were each on the opposite sides of me, 2 holding my chest, 2 holding my arms, and 2 holding down my legs. I was obviously terrified and I couldn't move. So I just closed my eyes and waited for it to end, and when it did, my dad was still on the computer, and other than feeling frightened, I wasn't harmed or didn't have any ill effects. Now, the absolutely weirdest encounter, and every time I talk about this with my parents or people close to me, my hair just stands and I get watery-eyed because I feel like it actually really affected me, was one night, again about 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., my parents were sleeping in their room. I was sleeping on the couch. I slept on the couch a lot as a teen because it was always hot in my room due to not having an AC vent in it. But I awoke in near pitch black darkness, and there was a little hooded person standing right next to me. I didn't feel stunned or scared. I couldn't get a good look at its face, but I do remember it having large eyes and a very smooth face. I almost want to say alien-like, but I don't know what it was. It extended its hand towards me and never said anything, but I felt this calm feeling and I took its hand. It helped me up from the couch, and when I stood up, I saw other beings identical to it. Other than the one holding my hand, there was one in the hallway where the bathroom and my room were. There was one in the kitchen, crawling on the ground for some reason. There was one behind me, looking at the house decorations my mum had put up. Then another one that was at my parents' bedroom door. I want to state too that it was weird, but I didn't feel scared, but just absolutely calm. The being holding my hand took me to the back door, and all I remember was opening the back door and then just this bright white light taking over my vision. I don't remember anything between this time and me coming back into the house from the front door, but the little person, still holding my hand, led me towards the wall where my parents' door was attached to. I remember it letting go of my hand, and as it did so, I looked upwards, and then it just felt like I woke up. And what startled me was I wasn't expecting to be standing, and I immediately just crumpled to the ground, my legs feeling completely wobbly. On the way, I hit my head against the wall pretty hard. My parents' house's interior is all drywall, so it was hollow and loud. And I remember as I just laid there, I saw my parents run out of their room, and upon seeing me on the ground, a look of horror on their faces. I told them about what happened, and I believe it was the final straw for them, so they asked a preacher from their church to come and bless the house. I'd like to state that I've told my parents about each encounter that I've had when it happened too, so they knew weird stuff was going on at this point. and ever since the house was blessed, I never experienced anything too weird again in that house. I eventually moved out and on with my life, moved around quite a bit. I was in the military for a while, and well, recently, about 20 years later I think, I was in the kitchen at night, about 2 a.m, and not in the house that I grew up in, but the current house that I live in thousands of miles away, pouring myself a glass of milk, when, from the corner of my eye, I saw this tall shadow man, well above 6 feet in height. It spooked me because I saw it raise its hand from the corner of my eye, as if it was reaching for something, not towards me though. And my first thought wasn't that it was a shadow man, but that it was a home intruder because I saw it so vividly from the corner of my eye. When I turned to face that direction, it just completely vanished. And the hair stood up on my arms immediately because it reminded me of my previous weird encounters that I've had in my life. And so, this is what's made me share these things publicly, to ask if anyone has had anything similar happen to them, or what people think these encounters could be, or even why I'm encountering these things, especially since I haven't really had anything too weird happen in like 20 years. I would also like to add too that I have a small dog that sleeps with my wife and I on our bed, and sometimes around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. again, he would just start growling and looking upwards towards the corner of the room where our door is. We never see anything, but my dog isn't really a barker and is super friendly. He's a little Boston Terrier that just loves people. And so, whatever he's seeing has to be spooking him pretty badly. Growing up in a small rural Vermont town meant that my household didn't have a lot of money, but we still shared everything that we had with our extended family. That included letting my aunt and uncle and cousin move in with us when they got evicted from their house. And everything was just fine, until the crying started. For 2 years, from age 12 to age 14, I had to share a room with my little cousin Katie. It wasn't all bad, since she was close enough to my age that she wasn't a total pest, but I hated the blackout curtains that we had to hang so that any outside light didn't keep her up at night. I love seeing the moonlight filter through the screen in the summer, and I missed that once Katie moved in. It was the second year that they'd been living with us when the crime began. At first, I thought it was Katie just sobbing quietly when she thought that I was asleep, which made sense to me because she had just gotten dumped a few days before. I figured that she didn't want to talk because she was ashamed of being the one that got dumped, or she was still just too heartbroken. Over the next few weeks, however, I began realizing that it was coming from different places within our room at night. I couldn't understand why Katie was continuing to cry so much, and any time I asked her about it, she just looked scared and shook her head. I thought that something else had happened between her and her ex-boyfriend, but she just wouldn't talk to me. I told my mum and my aunt one night while Katie was out at her friend Bree's house, but they just kind of shrugged it off and said that we were going through a rough time or something. My slightly drunk aunt joked that it was probably Katie at night crying because my fashion sense was so bad, and that maybe we should try a nightlight if we were going to be babies. I ignored her though and decided that I was done with the whole thing at this point. Things came to a head though about a month later after I talked to my mum and my aunt. So I was trying to sleep one night, my CD player earbuds lodged firmly into my ears when I felt a gentle tug on my pajama top sleeve. I removed the earbuds, turning my face to Katie, even though I couldn't actually see her in the darkness, and I said, "Huh? What's up?" Instead of an answer, all I got was a sniffle. And before I knew what was happening, Katie had crawled into my bed and curled up next to me. This was so out of character for her that I honestly didn't even question it. I just gently stroked her hair. She quieted down after a bit, and I covered her with my spare blanket because she was so cold. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up to Katie moving around next to me. She leaned over, her soft whisper barely reaching my ears. "Run! The one who got me is coming for you." I had no idea what she meant, but I felt her get off the bed and then everything was still and silent again. I strained my eyes to make her out in the pitch-black darkness, but with the blackout curtains, I couldn't tell where she had gone. "What? Katie? Who's coming? You're creeping me out." She never responded. But then, a primordial growl just sliced through the quiet, and a white-hot pain blurred my senses. I screamed as wet, warm liquid ran down my face, and a single hand snaked its way through my throat. I tried to kick out at Katie, but my feet didn't seem to be able to connect with anything. The air was rapidly getting squeezed from my lungs, and no matter how hard I tried, it was impossible for me to tear free of the vice-like hand. I was about to pass out when my door was flung open and my father stood there. The hand had released my throat at this point, and after a moment of catching my breath, I realized that it was just my father and I in my room. He shouted to my mum to call an ambulance. He then tried asking me what happened. I frantically begged him to search the room, but there was no one else in there. There wasn't even a closet to hide in, and the window was locked from the inside. I ended up passing out from losing so much blood, and I actually also lost my left eye that night. The doctors tried to blame it on a mixture of sleep paralysis, nightmares, and accidental self-harm. But at 120 pounds and no muscle, even my parents didn't believe that explanation. We moved out of that house immediately after that, since none of us felt comfortable there anymore. On the night that I lost my eye, Katie came to see me in the intensive care unit as soon as her mum picked her up from her new boyfriend's house. I was almost asleep in bed, and I remember her leaning over and whispering to me, her voice heavy with sorrow, "I'm so sorry, cuz. I wish I could have been there to help you." Even in my drug-induced, mostly sleep state, it struck me that her whisper didn't sound at all like the one that tried to warn me about the attack. I never did have another strange experience again after that, and when we moved, I even got my own room. Since then, I've never failed to make sure that there's some sort of light on in the room, and on those rare nights when I hear crying, I always make sure to leave the house for a while. I never did figure out who warned me or why they did it, but I'm forever grateful to them. If they hadn't have woken me when they did, I honestly believe that I would have been caught too off guard to fight back at all, and I would have lost more than just my eye. I am so thankful to still be breathing, and I make sure to always whisper goodnight to my unseen savior. This is an experience that I had when I was 7 years old, and is possibly the scariest and most real encounter that I've had to this day, and I've had a fair few interactions. So my house when I was 7 was a 3-story house, with the top floor only consisting of one bedroom, right above mine on the second floor. I'm an only child, so would have to entertain myself, which involved bringing certain toys to the upstairs room. The first time I ever stepped foot into this room, too, it just felt really strange. I would instantly get goosebumps and feel like I was just being watched by something. As I was young, though, I would just ignore it until I just got too uncomfortable and would go back downstairs. I would go up when friends were around and wanted some privacy from the adults. The experience never changed, though. I would also sleep with a stuffed animal, and a few months in, I would wake up to my stuffed animal propped up in the corner of my room, always facing me as well, always sitting upright. As I was so young, I didn't have a concept or even know what a paranormal thing was, so I just thought my parents would be taking it off me and placing it there or something, after waking me up for school. However, this started to happen much more frequently, to the point where I wouldn't sleep with that specific toy, my favorite that kept getting moved. But no matter where I put it in my room, at some point in the morning in the future, it would always be in the same place, propped up, just staring at me. Eventually, I got creeped out enough that I just got rid of that toy, but that was when things got really weird. So one night, I wake up to a massive bang at like 2 a.m, like something hitting the floor, but when I woke up, it's dead silent and pitch black with my face facing the door. But even in the pitch black, I could make out a small creature come into my room. It was a bald outline of a creature with pointy ears and claws, but no shadow or distinct features. Just the most intense darkness that I'd ever seen. It turns its head at me, and I blink. It disappears and reappears, clutching my backpack hanging on the other side of the room. It was about the same size as it, too. The same thing happens again. Its head does a slow 180 turn and then just stares at me. I blink, and it reappears next to my bed in an instant, but this time it's on the other side. On this side of my bed was my computer, an old one at the time with a big back to the screen. It was attached to an extension cord that had a glowing red light. With another blink, the creature vanished, but the extension cord started to turn on and off rapidly. I had been slowly rolling around every time the creature moved. After this, I rolled back to face the other side of my bed, fearing that whatever this thing was had gone under my bed and was about to come out the other side. But there was nothing. I laid there for what felt like hours, absolutely gripped with fear until I just fell asleep from exhaustion. In the morning, I passed off the event as just being a nightmare and proceeded to do my usual routine of getting out of bed and going onto my computer to play games. I turn it on and it's just static, like the same as when a TV is stuck between channels. My uncle actually fixes computers for a living, and he came in to inspect it, only to find something in it, and I'm no expert, but it had been burned or been destroyed or something. The computer was completely unfixable and had to be thrown out after that. And after that experience, I moved all my toys and stuffed animals into the room next to me that was also empty. Soon enough, this room started to display the same tendencies as the room above me had. Fortunately, after this was done, stuff stopped happening to me, and after that day, I never felt anything weird unless I went into the room next to me. So I live in Mexico City. I'm 21 years old, and through all my life, I've always witnessed paranormal situations around me. Things like voices in the middle of the night, doors opening and closing, the feeling of someone sitting on my bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, my bed sheets being pulled away at night, and TV turning on for no reason, and just so much more. At first, I was frightened, of course. My kid years were just plagued with horrible nights and the feeling of something watching me from the dark corners of my room. Later in my life, though, I just got used to it, up to the point where if anything happened, I just said shut up or let me be. My first strong paranormal experience, though, was when I was 15. During that time, I was a dancer with my ex-girlfriend. During the months that we practiced the dance, I started to become more angry, violent, and didn't want to talk to anyone. I used to be a kid with a great attitude, so it was a surprise for everyone who knew me that I was behaving this way. The nights were especially horrible. More than once I had sleep paralysis where I couldn't even blink and was dying out of horror as in the corner of my room I felt something look at me. Each time I had sleep paralysis too, I felt that shadow was just getting closer and closer. I started to have bad grades and my attitude was getting worse up to a point where I actually started a fight out of nowhere once when I hit a guy with just one punch. So hard in the chest, in fact, that he just fell down and couldn't stand up. But one night I was having sleep paralysis and felt that shadow was closer. I somehow, with all of my strength and fear, was able to stand up and stare with confusion to the darkness. Then, behind me, I felt something touch my neck, and I swear to God that I heard something saying, in a soft voice like a whisper, "Mine." Needless to say, I was shocked. To be honest with you guys, I didn't even believe what happened, and I just sat down on the floor shocked till my alarm sounded for school. I dressed and went to school, but my mother said that when she saw me that my face was pale and had no expression. But the next day, she asked me what was going on with me, and I told her everything that happened to me in the past weeks. She knew that I'd had paranormal experiences when I told her, but she always said that it was just in my mind and that those things weren't real. But this time, she saw me in so much horror and actually related those experiences to my sudden change of behavior to the paranormal. And that was when my aunt came in. She has been for quite some years a practitioner of Centeria. I don't really know how to say that in English. Sorry about that. But basically, it's a religion in Mexico and in many more Spanish-speaking countries. To summarize it, they believe that there are good spirits and bad spirits, and the bad spirits feed on the light of people until they take everything, destroying the person in many ways, psychologically, emotionally, and even physically. They apparently talk with good spirits, which help people in their need, and these spirits do not feed on light but on fire, essence of food, blood of animals, which, based on their beliefs, are bad people who reincarnated in these animals, and through sacrifice they cleanse their soul. I was taken to one of these, and the first thing that he said was that he felt the darkness and anger of a spirit which had impregnated me, and that it was the reason for my sudden change in character and constant night paralysis. My uncle, as he wanted me to call him, performed a ritual on me after this, and my uncle, alongside other Santeros, were around me and started the ritual with some chants that sounded kind of pagan-y. They burned mesquite and other things to create a dense smoke, light fires around me, and for the final touch, a black chicken was sacrificed, and they poured its blood all over me, alongside more cleaning with plants and smoke and other stuff. But the weirdest thing about this was that while they chant, I heard more voices. There were around 6 people, but I swear that I heard a lot more of people chanting around me. At the end of the ritual, too, I felt different, as if I was lighter, more relaxed. I was given a token after this. It was covered in the blood of the chicken, and my uncle said to me that a spirit was now bound to me and that he or she will protect me. I asked him about the voices, which he replied that these were the voices of the spirit that protect him and the rest of the 6. They chant alongside so that they could clean my soul and to help me bound to my protector spirit. On the way back home, we apparently have to get rid of the chicken body. The spirits told Uncle that it had to be on a graveyard, so we parked beside one and I threw it over the fence. So once I got home, it was plain dark and I walked up to my room. My house is an old house where my room is on the 3rd floor, kind of like an attic, and I was nervous because I thought after the ritual that the entity would try to harm me. But I opened the door and some kind of small cloud of smoke crossed the door and just disappeared. I'm not sure about this, but when that cloud of smoke was leaving, I thought I saw the resemblance of a face or something. Either way, if I saw a face or not, though, it was not possible for smoke to be in my room. I mean, the windows were closed and there was nothing that could have created it. In the end, I just assumed it was dust that flew out, but that night was the very first night of plain rest that I'd had in weeks, and for that, I was grateful. So this happened 2 days ago, and I've been racking my brain over this trying to explain it, but I just can't seem to come up with an explanation. So I took my bike down a trail in a state park in the southeastern United States. When I first started on the trail, I saw other people and the trail was fairly well worn. I went further until I noticed the trail was starting to be less and less traveled. I go hiking and biking a lot and quite often by myself, and I've never got uncomfortable or uneasy until this time. As I kept going forward, I just started to feel like I was being watched. Now alone in the woods, I'm thinking that there could be a number of animals scoping me out. A few minutes later, and I reach a small gate to allow bikers and hikers through. This was basically a property line of sorts, saying leave the current park and enter a different park. I'm absolutely alone and nobody else is around. The trail beyond this looked even less traveled and I'm not very maintained. I also had no idea where it would actually take me, so due to that, and the fact that I was already feeling like I was being watched, I decided that I should just turn around. I begin heading back the way that I came, but now the uneasy feeling just starts to intensify and continues to just get worse as I go. I'm riding back at around 5 to 10 miles per hour, and there is a distance of around 50 feet tree line to tree line with the trail in the center. Out of nowhere, though, something makes a large sound right behind me, so close that it had to be just beyond my tire. It sounded like something large and heavy jumping and landing right there. I freak out and whip my head around to see what it was, but when I did, there was nothing. I scanned the tree line to see if I could see any animals, but there was nothing there either. And at that point, I was too freaked out to stop or investigate and paddled as fast as I could out of there. I continued looking back behind me every few seconds, and once I was out of the trail, I started to think about it more. But the more I think about it, just the less I know what it was. I'm not ruling out an animal at this point. The only ones that could possibly be capable of something like this, though, would be a bobcat or maybe a panther or something. However, I feel like I would have been able to see either of those animals running off into the tree line, or at least disturbances where they were. I'm really sharing this to see if anyone has had a similar experience or knows what it could have been. I would also like to mention too that when I say freak out, I mean that I've never had something scare me like that. I had goosebumps from just head to toe, and the adrenaline just hit me immediately. So to start this out, for the past 10 years I'd say, I've always heard someone saying my name, footsteps, random perfume, etc. So my mum had always told me that it was just my grandma, and I thought nothing of it. New Year's around 2009, I'm 6 and I wake up to someone caressing my hand. Not in a weird way, but kind of comforting. So I told my mum about it, and she said that it was just my grandma checking in on me, since I'd never been able to meet her. I would randomly see my grandma in my dreams too, and I would always wake up in a good mood. Also, my grandpa from my dad's side died in a plane accident before I was even born, so again, I never got to meet him. So I was out in the garage with my dad the other night, and I started hearing his tools start moving. My grandpa was an avionic mechanic and loved all of this mechanic stuff, so I told my dad, and he started joking about how it's my grandpa helping me out with my car. I have lights turning on and off all the time and doors opening and closing, but I don't really have any problems with that. But now it's just starting to get weird. A couple of nights ago, I had my nieces staying at my house, both of which are around 2. They were staring off into the corner while I'm watching TV, so I asked them what they're staring at. And at the same time, they say, "The dark man in the corner." And at this, I almost crap myself. So I asked them to show me what he looked like, so they're drawing pictures of him, and it's a really scary picture. He has no eyes, his bottom jaw is gone, and half his head is missing. So I looked into the history of my house, and apparently there was a man here in the early 1990s who ended himself by a gunshot. So I was sketched out already, but then last night I was laying with my best friend on my couch, and I have my head in his lap. My niece runs up to me and smacks me as hard as she can and says, "Why can't you just get out already?" in this deep and really scary voice. And at this, I started freaking out and crying, and my dad is telling me that it's nothing, but I don't know what to do. All 3 mirrors in my room were shattered while I was at school today, and my room was completely destroyed upon coming home. I asked my parents, and no one was home today. No one even came into my room. We checked the security cameras, and no one ever came in, but you can very clearly hear footsteps and things in my room just crashing. I really don't know what to do, and I could desperately use some help right now. People keep telling me to ask someone for help. I know it sounds weird, but the original Exorcist house is 3 houses away from mine too. Everyone I've talked to tells me that it could be that energy coming to my house because I'm young and everyone else near me is really old with little energy or something. So I've decided to try and find someone to help me get rid of it. It's almost impossible though because, well, basically no one believes me. Whatever is there though, I'm guessing has been there for quite some time.